You are listening to the series, Even After Death, by author EvilAuthor. Olivia Fordham was married to Ethan Miller for 3 years, but that time could not compare with the 10 years he spent loving his first love, Marina Carlton. On the day that she gets diagnosed with stomach cancer, Ethan happens to be accompanying Marina to her children's health checkup. She doesn't make any kind of fuss, only leaving quietly with the divorce agreement. However, this attracts an even more fervent retribution. It seems Ethan only ever married Olivia to take revenge for what happened to his little sister. While Olivia is plagued by her sickness, he holds her chin and says coldly, "This is what your family owes me." Now, she has no family and no future. Her father becomes comatose after a car accident, leaving her with nothing to live for. Thus, she hurls herself from a building. The life my family owes will now be repaid. At this, Ethan, who's usually calm, panics while begging for Olivia to come back as if he's in a state of frenzy. The following is the main content. Chapter 1. In the hospital corridor, Keith Rogers said grimly while holding a biopsy report, "Olivia, the results are out. If the surgery is successful, your survival rate is 15 to 30%. Olivia gripped the strap of her sling bag tightly with her slender fingers. Her petite face was pale and solemn. "Keith, how long do I have left to live if I don't do the surgery?" 6 months to a year. It's different for everyone. In your case, it's better to do 2 rounds of pre-therapy first before the surgery. It will prevent the risk of spreading or undergoing metastasis. Olivia bit her lip while forcing out, "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I'll arrange for you to be admitted to the hospital right away," said Keith. "There's no need. I don't plan to receive treatment. I won't be able to get through it," Olivia said. Keith wanted to say something more, but Olivia tipped her head at him. "Keith, please help me keep this a secret. I don't want my family to worry." The Fordham family was bankrupt. Olivia already had to bend over backward just to cover the medical expenses of her father, Jeff Fordham. If her family knew about her illness, it would undoubtedly make the situation worse. Keith sighed helplessly and said, "Don't worry. I'll keep my lips sealed. I heard that you're married. Your husband. Keith, please take good care of my dad. I have to go now." Olivia seemed very reluctant to talk about this and left quickly before he could answer. Keith shook his head. Rumor had it that she had dropped out of university and gotten married. The top genius in medical school had fallen from grace into devastation. Throughout the 2 years of her father's treatment, she was the only one who took care of everything. Even when she had collapsed from illness and was sent to the hospital by passers-by, her husband had never shown up. Thinking back, Ethan had truly treated her well in the year they had gotten married. Alas, when his first love returned to the country, everything changed. There was once when Olivia, who also had a baby, fell into the water with Marina Carlton, his first love. Amidst her struggles, she saw him swimming toward Marina with all his might. Due to the ordeal, she and Marina both went into labor prematurely. Olivia had been rescued too late and missed the optimal window for receiving treatment. By the time she arrived at the hospital, her baby had been gone. 7 days on, Ethan asked for a divorce, but she had not agreed to it. Now that she knew about her illness, she could not deny it any longer. She dialed his number with shaking hands, and he picked up after the 3rd ring. He said coldly, "I won't see you unless it's to get divorced." Tears filled Olivia's eyes as she forced herself to swallow her words about her illness. Marina's voice suddenly came over the phone in the background. "Ethan, it's time for the pediatric checkup." The tears that Olivia had held back for a long time flowed down her face that instant. Her child was gone and her family was ruined, but he now had a family with someone else. It was time for all this to be over. She no longer begged him like before. Instead, she said weakly, "Ethan, let's get a divorce." Ethan was obviously stunned for a moment over the phone. He laughed coldly and said, "Olivia, what tricks are you playing this time?" Olivia closed her eyes and said, "I'll wait for you at home." It took all of her strength to hang up on him, and she slid to the ground against the wall. The rain blowing into the corridor drenched her as she gripped her phone and bit her sleeve while crying soundlessly. Ethan stared at his phone blankly after she hung up on him abruptly. After a year of the silent treatment where she refused to divorce no matter what, why had she suddenly changed her mind today? Her voice sounded tearful as well. Gazing out at the heavy rain, Ethan walked out of the ward. "Ethan, where are you going?" asked Marina while chasing after him with the babies in her arms. When she saw him walking away quickly, her gentle expression immediately grew frighteningly dark. Olivia. She still wouldn't give up. It had been a long time since Ethan had last stepped into the house they shared during their marriage. He had expected to see the dining table laden with his favorite dishes prepared by Olivia, but the villa was dark and empty. The sky always darkened too early during autumn. Night had fallen although it was only 6 p.m. Ethan spotted a vase of wilted flowers on the dining table. Knowing Olivia, she wouldn't leave wilted flowers sitting on the table, so there was only one possible explanation. She hadn't been home recently and had most likely been taking care of her father at the hospital. When Olivia opened the door, she saw a tall man standing by the dining table in a suit. The expression on his handsome face was as cold as ice and his dark eyes were filled with deep hatred. Olivia was soaked from the run from the car to the house in the rain. When his icy gaze fell on her, a chill went down her spine. "Where were you?" Ethan asked frigidly. Olivia's eyes, which always gleamed in the past, were dull at that moment. She looked at him indifferently and said, "Since when did you care about me?" Ethan sneered and said, "You won't be able to sign the papers if something happened to you." His words stabbed her heart like sharp needles. She dragged her feet forward, dripping wet. She did not cry or make a fuss but calmly pulled out the documents from an envelope. "Don't worry, I've already signed them," she said. She put the document on the dining table, and Ethan realized that he had never found the word divorce so displeasing in his life. Olivia only had one request, which was an alimony of $10 million. "I was wondering why you would suddenly agree to divorce. Turns out it's for money," he mocked. His scornful expression filled her vision. The old Olivia would have defended herself, but she was just too exhausted now. So, she only stood where she was and said softly, "By right, I could have taken half of your net worth, Mr. Miller. But I only asked you for $10 million. When it comes down to it, I'm still being benevolent." Ethan stepped forward, casting a long shadow over Olivia. He held her chin with his slender fingers and said in a deep, cold voice, "What did you call me?" "Mr. Miller. If you don't like this form of address, then I don't mind referring to you as my ex-husband. You can leave after signing the papers." Her arrogant expression displeased Ethan. "This is my house. Who gave you the right to ask me to leave?" he said. Olivia smirked and said, "Indeed, I do not have the right. Don't worry, Mr. Miller. I will move out after receiving the divorce certificate." With that, she slapped his hand away and looked him right in the eye. She said icily, "Mr. Miller, bring your documents to the city hall at 9 a.m. tomorrow. I'll see you there." In the dark of night, Olivia stood alone in the bathroom. The hot water chased away her chills. She rubbed her swollen red eyes and walked to a room. When she opened the door, a warmly furnished children's room lay before her. She pressed a button lightly, and mellow music from a music box filled the room. The room was lit with yellow lights. The atmosphere was undoubtedly homely, but Olivia wept unstoppably. God must have decided to take her life because she had failed to save her babies. She climbed onto the cot that was barely more than 3 feet long and curled up into a fetal position. Tears from her left eye flowed to her right eye, down to her cheek, then finally wet the children's blanket she was lying on. She hugged a plushie tightly while murmuring, "Sorry, my baby. It's all my fault. I failed to protect you. Don't be afraid. I'll be with you soon." After losing her baby, her mental health had deteriorated. Olivia was like a pretty flower slowly wilting away. She gazed out into the night, thinking as long as she could leave her father that sum of money, then she could go and be with her baby. Before dawn the next morning, Olivia was already fully dressed as she looked down at her own smiling face in the photo they'd taken outside the city hall after they registered their marriage. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed since then. She prepared a breakfast that was good for the stomach. Although she didn't have much time left to live, she wanted to live longer to take care of her father. As Olivia was about to leave the house, she received a call from the hospital. "Miss Fordham, Mr. Fordham had a heart attack. We've already sent him into the emergency ward. I'll be there right away." Olivia rushed to the hospital, but the surgery was still ongoing. She waited outside the operating theater with her hands clasped. She had already lost everything. Her only hope was for her father to live on in good health. A nurse handed her a receipt. "Miss Fordham, this is the total bill for your father's emergency treatment and surgery." Olivia scanned through the details and found that the total bill amounted to more than $100,000. Jeff's daily treatment expenses already cost $50,000 per month, and she only barely managed to make ends meet by working 3 jobs. After paying off his hospitalization fees earlier, she only had $5,000 left in her card. How was she going to afford his surgery? She had no choice but to call Ethan. He answered in a cold voice, "Where are you? I've already been waiting for 30 minutes. Something urgent came up, and I can't make it." "Olivia, is this funny to you?" Ethan sneered in response. "I was thinking why you would change your mind all of a sudden. Do you take me for a fool, making up lies like this?" He actually thought she was lying. Olivia explained, "I'm not lying. I was reluctant before this because I thought you must have had your reasons for treating me this way, but I see things clearly now. There's no point to a marriage like this, so I'm getting this divorce willingly. I couldn't make it because my father had a heart attack and had to undergo surgery." "Is he dead?" Ethan interrupted. It sounded weird to Olivia. Who even spoke like that? "No, the doctors are treating him." "Ethan, the surgery costs more than $100,000. Can you give me that $10 million? I promise I'll get the divorce." He responded with a snort. "Olivia, I hope you know that I, of all people, wish your father dead. I can give you the money, but only after we make the divorce official." The line went dead after that. Olivia's face was filled with disbelief. She remembered that Ethan had treated Jeff with respect when they were still together. However, the hatred in his voice earlier did not sound like a joke at all. Why did he want her father dead? Everything made sense when she connected the dots with the Fordham family going bankrupt 2 years ago. How could there have been such a coincidence? Ethan must have caused their bankruptcy, but how had her family offended him? Olivia had no time to dwell on it. The most urgent matter at hand was to gather $100,000 to pay her father's medical bills. The doors to the operating theater opened, and Olivia quickly stepped forward. "Dr. Herbert, how is my father?" "Don't worry, Ms. Fordham. Mr. Fordham made it, but he's still mentally fragile. Be careful not to trigger him in the meantime." "I understand," Olivia replied. "Thank you, Dr. Herbert." As Jeff was still unconscious, Olivia asked the nurse, "My father was quite healthy. Why did he suddenly have a heart attack?" The nurse answered hastily, "Mr. Fordham has been in good spirits recently. He even said that he craved lamb shank. I thought that Al Palfino was just 15 minutes away, so I went to buy him mushroom soup. When I came back, he had already been sent to the emergency ward. It's all my fault, Ms. Fordham. Did you see anyone before you left my dad?" "No, Mr. Fordham looked normal before I left. He even said that you like the carrot cake from Al Palfino and asked me to buy a slice. I never thought that this would happen." Olivia felt that things weren't that simple. After asking the nurse to take good care of her father, she rushed to the admission desk to check the visitor records. "Miss Fordham, nobody came to visit Mr. Fordham this morning," the nurse working at the desk replied. "Thank you. By the way, have you cleared the bill for Mr. Fordham?" Olivia did her best to hide her embarrassment as she replied, "I'll pay immediately." "I'm so sorry." She left the admission desk and took a taxi to the city hall, but Ethan was nowhere to be seen when she got there. Olivia called him in a panic and said, "I've reached the city hall." "Where are you?" "My office." "Ethan, can you come and settle the divorce procedures now?" Ethan sniggered and said, "Which do you think is more important? The business deal worth hundreds of millions that I'm about to make, or you? I can wait till you're done." "Ethan, I'm begging you. I need that money urgently for my father. If he dies, I'll pay for his funeral." With that, he hung up. When Olivia called him again, she realized that he had switched his phone off. The heavy rain beat down on her, and she couldn't breathe as she crouched under the bus stop sign. Olivia felt nothing but regret as she gazed at the busy street. If she hadn't had baby and dropped out of university, then she would have graduated with a degree by then. With her capabilities and academic talent, she would have had a very bright future. Who could have guessed that the Fordham family's sudden bankruptcy would cause Ethan, who had always loved her dearly, to change? She had lost everything in the blink of an eye. 1 year ago, Ethan had asked someone to take away all her jewelry and luxury handbags. The only valuable item she had left was her wedding ring. She took it off and walked into a high-class jewelry shop resolutely. The salesperson eyed Olivia, who was drenched and dressed in cheap clothes, up and down for a moment. She then asked, "Hi, did you bring the invoice and proof of purchase?" "Yes." Olivia pretended she hadn't noticed the salesperson's judgmental stare and hurriedly handed the invoice with her head lowered. "Thank you, miss. We have to send the ring to be verified. Can I contact you tomorrow?" Olivia licked her dry lips and said in an urgent tone, "I'm in urgent need of money. Can you speed it up?" "Okay, I'll try. Please give me a moment." Before the salesperson could take the ring away, a fair hand clamped down on the box. "This ring is very pretty. I'll buy it." When Olivia looked up, she found herself face to face with the person she hated the most, Marina. Marina wore a white cashmere coat. Her white pearl earrings made her look gentle and charismatic. Just the shawl around her neck was already worth more than $1,000. The salesperson went up to her and greeted her at once. "Mrs. Miller, is Mr. Miller not here today to pick out jewelry with you? There are some new arrivals. Each one of them would suit you great, Mrs. Miller. The emerald piece you asked me to reserve for you is here. Try it on later. I'm sure it would suit your complexion very well." The salesperson punctuated almost every sentence with Mrs. Miller just to butter Marina up, even though she and Ethan weren't legally married yet. Marina looked at Olivia with a smile and a proud look in her eyes that showed off her victory. Everyone knew that Ethan treated her like the most precious treasure, but they did not know that Olivia was his legally married wife. Olivia clenched her hands into fists. Why did she have to bump into the person she least wanted to see in her most embarrassing moment? Marina said mildly, "You'll lose a lot of money trading in a good quality ring like that." Olivia reached out and snatched the box away with a steely expression. "I'm not selling it anymore," she said. "No, what a real shame. I like that ring pretty much. I was even planning to offer you a higher price for it since we know each other." "Weren't you in a rush for money, Ms. Fordham?" Olivia's hand stiffened. Yes, she was in need of money, very desperately too. That was why Marina was insulting her so relentlessly. The salesperson advised her, "Miss, this is the fiancé of the Miller Group's president. You're very lucky that your ring struck her fancy. She'll surely pay you a good price for it, and you won't have to wait for us to complete the procedures before you get your money." It sounded like mockery to Olivia when the salesperson kept mentioning Mrs. Miller. A year ago, she had told Marina confidently that she would never divorce Ethan and asked her to give up. In just a year, everybody, high and low, knew who she was. Olivia felt more and more convinced that her marriage with Ethan was nothing but a scheme. Noticing her hesitation, Marina smiled brightly and said, "Ms. Fordham, why don't you name a price?" That woman's cocky expression disgusted Olivia. She said coldly, "I'm not selling it anymore." However, Marina wouldn't let it go. "Ms. Fordham, you're already at the end of your rope. Don't tell me that you still care about dignity. If I were you, I would sell it immediately. Has no one ever told you that stubbornness isn't a good look on you?" "What a joke, Ms. Carlton. Robbing other people of their things has made you think you really own them. Why don't you go and rob a bank?" While they were fighting, the ring flew out of the box in a graceful arc and fell to the floor with a soft clink. Olivia immediately rushed toward it, but the ring rolled to a stop by a pair of elegant leather shoes by the door. When Olivia bent down to pick it up, a drop of water dripped onto the back of her neck and sent chills through her. She looked up slowly into a pair of cold, emotionless eyes. Ethan was still holding an open umbrella, and droplets of water dripped from it onto her head. The black wool coat he was wearing complemented his figure and made him look stylish. Olivia stared at him blankly and recalled the first time she had seen him. 20-year-old Ethan had been wearing a white shirt as he stood on the sunbathed field, but it was as if he had been standing right inside her heart. That image was branded in her mind ever since she was 14. Now, she was wearing a sweater that made her look even skinnier with its fuzzy material. Her chin was sharp, and she looked thinner than she was 3 months ago. He looked grand and unparalleled, while she looked miserable and pathetic. Olivia's hand, which was about to pick up the ring, stopped in midair. While she was in a daze, Ethan expressionlessly raised his foot and stepped on the ring on his way past her. Olivia remained crouched. That ring had been designed according to his taste. Its design wasn't exaggerated, but it had a unique style. There was only one ring like that in the whole world. After he had put it on her, Olivia had never taken it off except when she was showering. If it wasn't because she was really in desperate need of money this time, she wouldn't have gone to such measures. However, what was a treasure in her eyes was just worthless rubbish to him. He hadn't just stepped on the ring, but also the past that she treated so preciously. Marina smiled and went to him while explaining, "Ethan, you're here. I just happened to be picking out jewelry when I saw Ms. Fordham selling her ring." Ethan's cold expression betrayed no emotions. His icy gaze rested on Olivia while she tried her best to suppress her fury. He then asked, "You want to sell that ring?" Olivia held back her tears and bit her lip to stop herself from crying. "Yes. Would you like to buy it, Mr. Miller?" Ethan smirked mockingly and said, "I remember you telling me how important that ring is to you. I can see how sincere you were now. Anything that is disregarded by someone else is worthless to me." As Olivia was about to answer, she felt a burning pain in her stomach. As the tumor grew, the pain went from a slight ache to a piercing pain. She looked at the couple, who looked like a match made in heaven in their matching black and white coats under the bright lights. She suddenly lost the strength to explain herself. A man whose feelings had changed wouldn't be bothered even if she gave him her heart. Olivia fought against the pain and picked up the ring. Then, she slowly walked back to the counter to retrieve the box and certificate. She didn't want to show weakness in front of Ethan. Although the pain was enough to make her pass out, she still maintained a steady gait. When she walked past him, she said mildly, "Just like you, I treated it like a treasure last time, but now, it's just a piece of metal I can exchange for money." Ethan felt that something was off with her. Her forehead was beaded with sweat, and her face was as white as a sheet. She looked like she was trying her best to fight against some sort of pain. Suddenly, he gripped her arm and said in a low voice, "What's wrong?" Olivia shook off his hand and said, "It has nothing to do with you." She did not spare him another glance and did her best to keep her back straight as she disappeared from his sight. Ethan watched her leave. He had been the one to let her go, but why did his heart still ache? Olivia went to a deserted corner and dug her painkillers out of her bag in a fluster. She knew that all the treatments and cancer medicine had side effects, so she only bought some painkillers and regular stomach medicine, which was better than nothing. Gazing out at the heavy rain, she thought, "Is that the only choice I have left?" That was the last person she wanted to meet, but she had no choice but to take a gamble for her father's sake. Olivia went home to clean herself up before taking a taxi to Hawthorne Villa. When she had returned to the country more than a year ago, that person had called Olivia once. They hadn't met in more than 10 years, and Olivia had no idea how she was doing. Judging by the grand villa, Olivia guessed that she had been doing pretty well. After stating the purpose of her visit, a maid led Olivia into the living room, where a graceful woman was sitting. She was as beautiful as Olivia remembered her to be. "Liv," said the woman as she looked at Olivia with her pretty eyes. However, Olivia couldn't bring herself to call her mom. Chloe Parker had left when Olivia was 8. It was Jeff's birthday, and Olivia had been in high spirits, eager to return home and celebrate her father's birthday with her family. She never knew that what awaited her was her parents' divorce. Olivia had chased after her mother, scrambling down the stairs and falling. She did not even realize that she had lost her shoes. All she cared about was clinging onto her mother's legs and crying, "Mom, don't go." The graceful woman bent down, stroked Olivia's cheeks, and said, "I'm sorry. Mom, I'm first in my grade. You haven't seen my test papers yet. You have to sign them. Don't leave me, Mom. I'll be a good girl. I promise I won't go to any more fun fairs. I won't make you mad. I'll listen to you, please." Hastily, young Olivia blubbered everything she could think of in hopes of making Chloe stay. In the end, Chloe simply told Olivia that her marriage with Olivia's father was not a happy one and that she had found her true happiness elsewhere. Later, Olivia watched as a man she had never met helped Chloe place her luggage in a car, and they both left while holding each other's hands. She chased after their car for a mile without wearing any shoes before crashing heavily onto the ground. Her feet and knees were scraped, and they bled as she stared at the gradually diminishing outline of the car that she could never reach. At that time, she could not understand what had happened. Now that she was grown up, she knew that it was because her mother had been caught cheating on her father and simply decided to file for a divorce, leaving him with everything, including Olivia herself. Chloe had never contacted Olivia, and the latter hated her with every fiber of her being. She even hoped that she would never have to meet Chloe again. However, fate worked in mysterious ways, and Olivia could do nothing to stop it. Her throat went dry and her feet turned to lead. Chloe knew what was on her daughter's mind. She approached Olivia and pulled her to sit beside her. "I know you hate me. You were very young back then. Lots of things weren't as simple as they seemed, so I wasn't able to explain them to you." She caressed Olivia's cheeks and continued, "Look at you, all grown up now. Liv, now that I'm back, I'll be staying here permanently. I know something's happened to the Fordham family. It doesn't matter, though, because I'll take care of you." It was then that Olivia knew the so-called hatred she harbored toward her mother was not worth mentioning at all. Her voice cracked as she called out, "Mom. My dear, since you're here already, you should stay and have dinner. Chris has taken good care of me for the past few years. He has a daughter who's older than you by 2 years. She's coming over with her fiancé for dinner. I'll introduce you to her later." However, it was not in Olivia's plans to make herself part of Chloe's new family. She hastily interrupted her. "Mom, I'm here this time for my dad. My family's bankrupt now, and Dad just had a heart attack, but I don't have the money to pay for his surgery. Can you help me? I promise I'll return the money to you." Chloe had not yet replied when they heard a familiar voice. "Miss Fordham, you truly are short of money, aren't you? Going so far as to come to my house for it?" It was like a slap to the face. Olivia looked incredulously over at the people standing by the door. Who else could it be except Marina and Ethan? Apparently, fate was toying around with her again. She never thought that her very own mother would be Marina's stepmother. Olivia's husband and mother were now Marina's family. To make things worse, those two had caught her in the act of asking her mother for money. Ethan noticed her uneasiness, but he remained calm and indifferent toward her. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced through the awkwardness in the air. Olivia noticed a maid pushing in a twin stroller. The moment the baby's cries started, Ethan was already picking up and soothing one of them skillfully. They formed an eye-catching picture of a happy family of 4. Olivia's child would have been this age too if it were alive. She started regretting coming here. She felt as if she was being embarrassed and humiliated over and over again. Strangely, one of the babies could not stop crying today. The maid rushed to prepare the milk, yet the cries worsened instead. Patiently, Ethan continued soothing the baby. "Be good, and don't cry." The sight of a tall man like him holding a baby gently in his arms was heartwarming. Seeing this patient and gentle side of him, Olivia suddenly had a thought. In just a few strides, she approached him and picked up the child. Somehow, Ethan did not stop her from doing so. Even more strangely, the child stopped crying and started to smile the moment Olivia held it in her arms. The corner of its lips curved into a smile, and its eyes twinkled as it looked at her. The child then started chuckling and mumbling, "Amma." Its tiny hands reached up in an attempt to grab the fluffy ball-like ornament on her cap. The child was all smiles, which was the exact opposite of Ethan. It was like a blade had ruthlessly stabbed into her heart, and it was the last straw for her, crushing any bit of persistence left in her. She once thought that Ethan truly loved her. He had been kind to her during their first year of marriage. She could still remember him whispering to her, "Liv, let's have a baby." How could she refuse him then? Even though she had not completed her studies, she did not hesitate to conceive a child. Only now did she realize that for all the time he spent with her, he did the same with another woman every time he went abroad for business. Nausea overtook Olivia. She returned the baby to Ethan and darted into the toilet. Then, she locked the door behind her. She did not eat much today. When she puked, all that came out was a mixture of her blood and the medications she took. Crimson liquid filled her sight, and tears started flowing down her cheeks. Great, just great, she thought. Her marriage had been a joke all along. Everything had an explanation now. It turned out that everything had been planned from the beginning. So, this was the reason he chose to save Marina instead of her when they both fell into the water that day. It also explained why he accompanied Marina when they both went into premature labor. It was because the children in her womb were his. After quite some time, Olivia heard a knock on the door. "Liv, are you all right?" It was Chloe. Olivia cleaned up the mess, splashed her face with water, and stumbled out of the washroom. Chloe was unaware of the events between them. She asked Olivia, "Are you sick?" "I just feel sick looking at those two. I feel much better now that I've vomited." "Do you know Marina? She's always been abroad. Is there some kind of misunderstanding between you two?" "This is Ethan." "I know." Olivia interrupted her, her voice cold as ice. "Ethan Miller, the president of Miller Group. Who in this world wouldn't know him?" "Yes. He's a brilliant and accomplished young man." "Indeed. He hasn't even divorced yet, but he's already eager to remarry. Ordinary people wouldn't be as bold as him." This left Chloe rather confused. "What are you talking about? He isn't married, so why would he get a divorce?" The smile on Olivia's face did not reach her eyes. In a mocking tone, she said, "Who am I then, if he isn't married?" "Mr. Miller, why don't you tell my mom just who I am?" Chloe looked at Ethan with a puzzled gaze. She never knew that he was married. "Mr. Miller, we stayed overseas for many years and are unaware of what goes on here. What does my daughter have to do with you?" Ethan's eyes were calm. His expression remained indifferent as he said, "Even if there was something between us, it's already in the past. I'm settling my divorce soon." Olivia never thought that he would take things so lightly after all their years of marriage. She had given him her heart, yet this was all she got in the end. Needless to say, she was furious at him. However, she felt more disappointed than anything else. It was the disappointment of finding out just how blind she had been to treat trash like him like something precious. Olivia took out the ring box and hurled it at Ethan's face. "My deepest regret is marrying you. See you at the city hall tomorrow. Whoever fails to show up is a coward." The box hit him squarely on his forehead, leaving a trail of blood dripping down his face. It opened and fell together with the ring onto the ground. This time, Olivia did not look back. She stepped on the ring as she left and slammed the door shut. Too many things had happened over the past 2 years, and this was the final straw. She did not manage to go far before passing out by the roadside. It started pouring from the sky as if the world itself loathed her. Olivia thought that it would be better to just die like this. For her, there was nothing worth remembering in a world full of schemes and lies like this. When she woke up, she was lying in an unfamiliar room. The dull, yellowish light from a lamp chased away the darkness in the room. The warmth here was like a soothing breeze in spring. "You're awake." Olivia's eyes fluttered open to see Keith's eyes staring back at hers. "You saved me. I was on my way home when I saw you passed out by the roadside, so I brought you back. You were thoroughly soaked, so I had the maid help you change," Keith said, his eyes clear and sincere. "Thank you, Keith," Olivia thanked him. "I made oatmeal. You should have some warm water first," Keith told her. Olivia removed the blankets and started to get off the bed. "No need. It's late, and I don't want to trouble you." She was frail. The moment her feet touched the floor, her body tilted forward helplessly, making her fall to the ground. Hurriedly, Keith rushed to her aid by supporting her with his arms. Olivia could smell the light fragrance from his clothes. It was similar to the laundry detergent she used at home. Ethan also had the same scent back then. She could not help but feel her heart break when she thought of him. "You're too frail right now. Stop pushing yourself if you want to live for a couple more days, Keith warned her, yet his tone was gentle. Think of it as you're doing this for your father. Only then did her dull and dispirited eyes flicker with a sliver of hope. Sorry to trouble you. She watched as Keith busied himself in the kitchen. In truth, she and him were not that close. At most, he had given her a reward when she was nominated as the best student in her freshman year. That time, he was her senior by 4 years and had been doing his internship at a prestigious school elsewhere, so he did not spend much time in college. Later, she met him again in the hospital, and they started contacting each other more frequently. Still, their relationship was not close enough for her to always impose on him. After finishing her meal and taking some medication, her stomach finally settled. Keith then brought up the issue of her chemotherapy. Medicine nowadays is advanced, and you're only in the middle of the late stage of cancer. Even some patients in the final stage survived, so you must have faith in yourself. Chemotherapy is a highly effective treatment. Olivia lowered her head. I've studied medicine before. I know its pros and cons. Keith continued giving her advice. The chances of remission after that are high. Even if the side effects are severe, you can do it with some determination. Olivia raised her head to look at him with tears in her eyes. She was spending every ounce of her strength to force back her tears as she muttered with trembling lips, "But I can't do this anymore." Keith wanted to console her, but the words were now stuck in his throat. He stared at her red-rimmed eyes and felt himself die a little inside. After a while, he asked, "Is there truly no one else in this world that you care about anymore?" Startled, Olivia took some time before replying, "The only person I care about is my dad." "Then you should live even if it's only for him." Olivia smiled bitterly. "Thanks. I feel much better now. I'll be leaving." It was then that Keith realized that the ring on her finger she had always cherished was missing. He started to speak but swallowed back the words. Eventually, he asked, "Where are you going?" "I'll drive you there." "No, thanks. I've called a cab. It's coming soon." She refused his help so swiftly that he could do nothing but go along with it. Still, he thought that he should still be concerned. Her face was full of sorrow when they talked just now. He was worried that she would end her life, so he tailed the cab she took. The cab drove and stopped beside a river. Olivia stood alone and stared at the water. Even though it had stopped raining, the weather was still cold. Keith wanted to stop her from doing anything rash, but he saw a black MPV stop beside her. The car door opened, and out came the person whose face was always seen in finance magazines. Keith was shocked. Could that man be Olivia's husband? The wind tousled Olivia's hair, highlighting the agony on her already pale face. Ethan subconsciously wanted to raise his hand and tuck the strand of hair behind her ear. However, he quickly retracted it and asked, "What is it?" Olivia glanced over at him, her eyes cool and indifferent. She looked as if she wanted to make sure that the person standing before her was indeed him. "Were you behind my family's bankruptcy?" she asked. She did not beat around the bush, so he too went straight to the point and answered, "Yes." "Are the children yours?" This was her second question. She stared unblinkingly at him. She could have been overthinking things. However, it was never in his plans to deny this. "Yes," he said with his usual nonchalance. Olivia approached him and slapped him across the face. "Ethan Miller." He grabbed her wrist easily in one hand and brushed the tears on her cheeks with the other. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "How could you treat me like this? What did my family do to deserve this?" The look on Ethan's face remained as calm and indifferent as ever when he spoke. "Why don't you ask your father about what he did?" Olivia swallowed before asking him. "Have you ever loved me, Ethan?" There was not even a ripple in his fathomless gaze. Slowly, he said, never. Since the beginning, you've always been nothing but a pawn. Her tears slid down her cheeks and fell onto the back of his hand. The breeze blew, taking away any lingering warmth that was left. You hate me, don't you? Yes. This is what you Fordhams owe me. You should blame yourself for being Jeff Fordham's daughter. I'll make you suffer every day to pay for what you've done to my little sister. Didn't your sister go missing long ago? What does this have to do with my family? He looked at her in disdain as if he were a ruler laying down judgment. Did you know that my sister was being tormented while you were enjoying the affection of the people around you? Take a guess. I won't tell you the truth. I want you to suffer and live a miserable life without ever knowing what happened. You'll get a taste of what my sister went through. Ethan got in his car after saying, I'll be waiting at the city hall at 9 tomorrow. Olivia rushed over to his car and started hitting the car door. Tell me, what happened to your sister? However, the driver slammed his foot on the accelerator, and the car zoomed out of sight, making her lose her balance and fall to the ground. The wind blew bitingly cold on her face. Olivia was frozen to the core, but she pushed herself up and continued chasing after the car. She overestimated the current condition of her body and only ran for a couple of feet before crashing back to the ground. The car door opened. She saw a pair of shiny, tailored leather shoes halt before her. Slowly, she moved her sight from the shoes and up the trousers until she met Ethan's cold and unnerving gaze. Ethan, Olivia muttered weakly. A pair of slender hands reached out to her. In a trance, Olivia thought she caught a glimpse of the young man she had fallen head over heels for all those years back. She could not help but stretch out her hands to him. Just as their hands touched, Ethan pulled back, extinguishing the light in her after giving her false hope and causing her to fall once more. She had not injured herself before this, but when she slipped this time, she cut her palms on the pieces of shattered glass on the ground. Blood started trickling down her palms to her arms. A shadow seemed to flit across Ethan's face, but he stayed motionless. Olivia was stunned. Back then, he would rush her to the hospital in the middle of the night even though she merely had a cut on her finger. She remembered the doctor chuckling and saying, "Thank goodness he brought you here in time. Otherwise, your wound would have healed on its own." The man before her and the one in her memories were the same person. He had the same eyes and face. Looking back, she realized that the concern he once showed for her was nowhere to be seen, replaced by a shade of icy indifference. In a cold voice, Ethan said, "Olivia, do you really think that I don't know you? You could easily run a mile and do a somersault. Do you expect me to believe you'd fall after running just a couple of steps?" He stared at her, the mockery in his eyes like a knife cutting through her. Olivia bit her lip and tried to explain. "It's not like that. I'm not lying to you. I'm just a little weak because I'm sick." Ethan did not wait for her to finish. He crouched and tilted her face upward to face him. His rough fingers brushed her dry, chapped lips. "You truly are your father's daughter. You two are pretentious to the extreme and would put on a crazy act just for some money." Those words stung more than the cold wind, and they stabbed at her heart repeatedly. She swatted his hand away from her face. "My father is an upright person. He would never do anything to harm anyone." Ethan sneered. He decided he no longer wanted to discuss this matter with Olivia and plucked a check from his wallet instead. He carelessly wrote on the check, held it in between two fingers, and placed it in front of Olivia. "Do you want this?" he asked. $5 million certainly was not a small amount. It would spare Olivia the headache of securing funds for her father's medical bills. However, she did not take the check because Ethan would not be so kind to her. "I have one condition, though," Ethan added and whispered in her ear. "This money is all yours if you repeat after me. Jeff Fordham's disgusting." The look on Olivia's face changed instantly, and her hand shot up in an attempt to slap him across the face. Ethan stopped her by grabbing her by the wrist, and as Olivia struggled against him, she left a bloody handprint on his shirt. Ethan's grip on her tightened, and his tone became harsher. "Oh, you don't want to do it. He'll have to die in the hospital then. I've already picked a burial spot for him anyway." Tears streamed down Olivia's face as she asked, "Why did you become like this?" The man who had once swore an oath to protect her and cherish her for the rest of her life was long gone, replaced by a ruthless person who found joy in making her break down in tears. The dim light from the nearby lamppost illuminated his face, further emphasizing his annoyance and impatience. "So you're not going to say it, right?" He released his grasp on her and slowly tore the check into pieces. Olivia rushed forth to stop him, but he shoved her away and told her in a tone devoid of emotions, "I've given you a chance." The paper shreds fell from his hands, just like the hope she had had for him. "No, don't." Clumsily, Olivia hurried to pick them up as her tears continued to flow. She looked like a child who had lost everything she valued, anxious and helpless. Ethan turned to leave, and just when he was about to get in his car, he heard a thud. He turned around to see her figure lying unconscious on the ground. Kelvin, the driver, had an anxious look on his face as he asked, "Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller's passed out. Should we send her to the hospital?" Ethan's gaze was unsettling when he looked at Kelvin. "Are you worried about her?" Kelvin was confused. He had been working for Ethan for a long time. It was clear as day that Mr. Miller had been head over heels for Mrs. Miller in the past, but his entire personality seemed to change after going to identify his sister's corpse. Nevertheless, this was his employer's family matter, so he dared not probe further. He simply drove away. The car drove further and further away. Ethan looked at Olivia through the rearview mirror and found that she still had not gotten up. The look of disdain on his face deepened. Apparently, her acting had improved in just a few days. Despite letting her live a sheltered life, Jeff had Olivia participate in various fitness programs since she was young to prevent her from being a target of bullying. She had a black belt in Taekwondo and was an expert in self-defense. There was no way someone as fit and healthy as her would faint so often like this. To him, Olivia was putting on an act for money. As this thought crossed his mind, he averted his gaze from the rearview mirror, refusing to spare her another glance. Seeing Ethan's car gradually disappear, Keith finally came to Olivia's side. When Olivia awoke once again, she found herself in the room she had left not too long ago. A needle was stuck in the back of her hand, and the IV fluid slowly seeped into it. Her left hand was bandaged. She looked at the clock that hung on the wall and saw that it was already 3 in the morning. Before she could react, she heard Keith say in a gentle voice, "Sorry, I followed you because I thought you would do something insane." Seeing that Olivia wanted to sit up from the bed, Keith rushed to her aid by placing a pillow behind her. Then he gave her some water. She finally opened her mouth to speak. "Did you witness everything? I'm sorry. It wasn't my intention." Keith was so earnest and sincere, while Ethan was the exact opposite of him. "It's okay. I'm his wife. There's nothing to hide, anyway." Keith's expression seemed to freeze for a second. Olivia noticed it and smiled bitterly. "Right. Everyone thinks Marina is his fiancée now. It doesn't matter if you don't believe." "No, I believe you. I recognize the design of your wedding ring. It was an SL limited edition. That's the only pair that exists. The magazines mention that SL's boss designed it specially for his wife. And I know that Ethan Miller is the one behind SL." Back then, Keith suspected that Olivia and Ethan were together, but he dismissed the idea after hearing the gossip between Ethan and Marina. Ethan rarely came to the hospital after that too. Olivia subconsciously touched the place where she usually wore her ring. Her finger was bare now, and the skin where the ring had once been was a bit fairer than the rest of her hand, as if it was reminding her of her ridiculous marriage. "It doesn't matter if I'm his wife. We're getting a divorce tomorrow at 9. Does he know about your condition? He doesn't have the right to know about it." Olivia sounded unnaturally calm when she said this. It was as though she had thoroughly let go of Ethan. However, Keith knew that letting go of someone you once loved was not as simple as this. She was like an injured animal that would hide her wounds in front of others but tended to them when no one was around. Still, Keith did not probe further about it. He tried changing the subject. "I know you haven't paid for your father's surgery. Since we're friends, I'll lend you some money for now. You can pay me back in the future." It was not a simple matter for Olivia to obtain such a large sum of money. He had offered help multiple times before this, but she always refused. Today was no different, as Olivia shook her head and said, "No, thanks. Olivia, your father's condition is serious. Would you rather be humiliated by that scumbag than accept my help?" "I have no conditions. I just want to help you. My family might not be as wealthy as the Millers, but this sum isn't much to me. So, don't worry about it." Olivia was holding a glass of water with both hands. He thought she looked pale to the extreme when she glanced over at him. It made him rather upset to see her in such a state. "Keith, I know you're a good person, but there's no future for me anymore." Whether it was money or his kindness, she couldn't repay any of it. Noticing the fluid in the IV bag was almost finished, Olivia forcefully pulled the needle free from the back of her hand. Blood gushed out from the wound since there was no gauze to stop the bleeding. However, she did not seem like she cared. Picking up her jacket, she told him, "You don't need to worry about the money. He'll give me $10 million when I divorce him. My father just had surgery yesterday. I'm going to visit him at the hospital." She was as stubborn as a mule, just as had been when she suddenly decided to give up her studies to marry despite being dubbed the college genius. Even her mentors would sigh in grief while talking about her when Keith joined them for meals. Olivia seemed to expect that Keith would suggest driving her to the hospital. Before he could say something, she was already gesturing to her phone and cutting off any chance of letting him speak. "The cab is here." Olivia then put on her jacket. As she placed a hand on the doorknob, she heard him ask, "Olivia, did you ever regret letting go of everything to marry him?" Did she regret it? Ethan was the cause of her family's misery. Her father was hospitalized after suffering from a huge shock right after a car accident, while Olivia herself lost her darling child. Logically speaking, she should be regretting her decision, but when she closed her eyes, she would remember the shipwreck and the man who had rescued and dragged her back from the storm. He was the youngster she once met at school. She forced her tears at bay and said to Keith, "I don't." Keith watched her leave with mixed feelings, and the door closed with a click. When Olivia arrived at the hospital, Jeff was still in the ICU. She could only watch him from afar. The questions she had for him were lodged in her throat. In her memories, her father was a person who was both kind and humble. Before her parents' divorce, they never raised their voices at each other. He never remarried after Chloe left. All the spare time he had, he would spend it accompanying Olivia. Ethan kept mentioning her father, which meant the person he hated was not her. When they were still together, he had mentioned having a little sister that went missing. Her disappearance took a toll on his mother's mental health, which was why she stayed overseas all the time. What was the connection between his lost sister and her father then? Olivia decided it was best to start investigating those who worked for her father. She rushed off to find Harvey, her father's chauffeur, and Victor, their butler, at their respective homes. The two of them had worked for her father for many years. Strangely, one had gotten into an accident and the other had gone overseas, and she was unable to contact them. The only thing she knew now was that her father was still unconscious. She spent the day in a daze, not knowing what to do. Still, since things had come to this, the only explanation was that none of this was a coincidence. Clearly, someone had devised this. But Olivia was no fool. Since she did not manage to obtain any clues from her family's side, she shifted her target to Ethan's chauffeur, Kelvin, and his assistant, Brent. She checked her wristwatch for the time. It was only 7 in the morning, so they should be on the way to Ethan's place. Olivia dialed Brent's number. After some time, he answered the call and said in his usual polite tone, "Mrs. Miller." Olivia tried to suppress her bitterness when she heard him addressing her that way. "Mr. Ingram, I've made an appointment with Ethan to settle our divorce. Can you pick me up so we could go to the city hall together?" Brent fell silent. Just like Ethan, he did not like any sudden change of plans. Hastily, Olivia added, "Please don't misunderstand. I don't have other intentions. I'm just afraid that something might happen and stall us from getting divorced. I still haven't settled my father's medical bills." In truth, she was pretty close with them both. She was never rude to them, so when she spoke gently, Brent did not refuse. "Where are you, Mrs. Miller?" "I'll be right there." Olivia stated a location that was nearest to them. This place was along the road to Collington Cove, which was where Marina lived. Despite being reluctant to admit it, Ethan was caught spending the night here by the media multiple times. So, he must have been staying here when he and Olivia were apart a few months back. "Sorry, Mrs. Miller, but we're almost in Midvale. You'll have to wait for about 20 minutes. "Okay." Olivia was quite surprised. Midvale was somewhere near the Miller residence. Did Ethan not live with Marina? Olivia quickly dismissed the thought. Whether he stayed with Marina was none of her business. Kelvin drove fast, and they arrived in no time. As always, Brent opened the door for her. "Sorry for the wait, Mrs. Miller." Olivia nodded and got in the car. "No worries." Brent was a rather stoic person. Compared to him, Kelvin was more lively and talkative. "Why didn't you sleep in, Mrs. Miller? It's so cold today." "The sun isn't even up yet," Kelvin said. Brent shot daggers at Kelvin to shut him up. Olivia tried to exaggerate things by speaking slowly. "Initially, I thought Ethan had a change of heart because of Marina. But now, it seems it's not just because of her. You two have been working with him for so long, so you should know something about his sister." The car came to an abrupt stop with a loud screech. Kelvin took his hands off the steering wheel and gestured to dismiss what she said. "You can't just say things like that, Mrs. Miller." Calmly, Brent answered, "Mrs. Miller, you know that we usually won't ask Mr. Miller about his personal matters. Even if we know something, we can't disclose anything to you. Please understand." Olivia covered part of her face with one hand. A tear slid down between her fingers as she said, "I know I'm making things difficult for you too, but I have no choice. Ethan wouldn't tell me about it, and my dad is still unconscious after the surgery. My family has fallen into such a hopeless state, and I have no idea why. Even if I were to die, I'd want to know the truth. I don't want to suffer from ignorance every day. Mrs. Miller, what happened to Mr. Miller's sister is taboo. We don't know much about it." As if knowing that Olivia would continue asking them for help, Brent started writing an address on a piece of paper and passed it to her. "Mrs. Miller, since we're friends, this is the most I can do to help you." Olivia looked at the paper in her hand. It was the address of a cemetery. Was Ethan's sister dead? Even so, what did her father have to do with her death? If anyone were to know what kind of person her father was, it would be Olivia. And she knew he was not one to harm others, let alone a young woman. She knew that Brent and Kelvin would not disclose more information and decided to stop probing them. It was silent all the way to the Miller's residence. Olivia had mixed feelings when they arrived. Brent politely asked her, "Mrs. Miller, would you like to go inside?" "No, thanks. I'll wait for him here." This was the final time she would meet him, and it was only to settle their divorce. She did not want to cause more trouble for herself. Besides, every single thing in there would remind her of their time together, and she refused to reminisce about the past. He was to blame for cherishing her so much back then. Even though he had become colder and more indifferent to her over time, she would never forget how kind and loving he had been. He should have been someone she hated to the core, but she could not find it in her heart to do so. The ignition was not turned off, and the inside of the car was warm and comfortable. She was the only one left in the car now. Her stomach started to hurt again, and she curled up into a fetal position and waited for the sky to brighten up. After that, she shifted into a position where she hugged her knees tightly to her chest. It was winter, so the days were short and the nights long. It was already 7 in the morning now, yet the sky was still rather dark. The leaves had fallen from the apple tree in the garden, making her thoughts drift off to some time during the apple season. She yearned to have a taste of apple cider. Knowing this, Ethan helped to pick the fruits for her. Back then, the Ethan she knew was amiable and approachable. He was an excellent cook, and he spoiled her like a princess. As her thoughts wandered, she found herself walking alone toward the tree. It was still there, as it had been back then. But everything had changed, including the man she'd been with. Even the tree had changed, only a couple of dried leaves hung from the branches now. Its sorry state resembled her current relationship with Ethan. As Ethan walked out of the mansion, the same sight greeted him. A woman wearing a thin knitted shirt stood watching the apple tree from below. A gentle breeze blew, gently tousling her hair. The weather was way better today than the past few days. The first rays of the sun cast its glow on her face. Her fair skin glowed under it, making her look like a fairy who would vanish into thin air in the blink of an eye. Her hands were bandaged, but her countenance was pale, and she still wore the clothes she wore last night. Ethan. She did not look at him but was able to sense his presence. He hummed. Slowly, Olivia turned to face him. They stood close to each other, yet their hearts were far apart. "I want to drink the apple cider you made one last time." Ethan was taken aback and took some time to respond. "The apple season has passed. Stop wasting your time," he said, emotionless. Olivia's eyes looked a little puffy as she muttered, "Can you treat it as my last request before our divorce?" She seemed to have changed a lot in just 3 months. He turned to look at the barren tree. In a slightly softer tone, he told her, "The frozen ones from last year aren't fresh. Let's see how it goes next year." Olivia brushed her fingers on the rough bark of the tree. She wouldn't be able to wait for another year. "You must hate me a lot, right?" "Yes. Then, will you be happy if I die?" She turned to face him and spoke softly. His heart skipped a beat at her words, and his thoughts became empty. For a moment, it felt like he had lost his mind. After some time, he recomposed himself and calmly said, "Fine. It's just some apple cider. Come on in." Olivia watched as he entered the house, the corner of her lips turning up into a smile. "Are you afraid of me dying?" she thought to herself. All of a sudden, she thought of taking revenge on him. She wondered what kind of expression he would wear when he received the news about her death one day. Would he be glad or upset? Ethan took out the box of frozen apples from the fridge to defrost. Olivia watched as he busied himself in the kitchen, thinking ruefully that this was probably the last time he would cook for her. At least it was something worth remembering. She crouched by the fireplace and started roasting marshmallows. The sweetness permeated the air, reminding her of how Ethan's grandmother would never fail to rush over when she smelled roasted marshmallows in the winter. The old lady treated Olivia really well, as if she were her own granddaughter. Sadly, she passed away 2 years ago. Ethan's grandfather then moved overseas to prevent himself from being constantly reminded of his loss. The once cozy mansion now stood cold and empty. Ethan's grandmother was no longer here to rob Olivia of her roasted marshmallows too, and that made Olivia feel empty inside. After finishing the roasted marshmallows and gulping down a glass of warm water, she felt that her stomach did not hurt as much as before. She could smell the pleasant scent of food from the kitchen. Olivia walked over to find Ethan pouring some of the soup into a thermos flask and into a bowl. Since when had she fallen from being his priority and one and only? She asked herself that question. Yet, she continued to turn a blind eye to the truth of their relationship by reminding herself of how sweet he was to her in the past. "The apple cider is ready," Ethan said, unaware of her dampening mood. "Thank you." Olivia stared at the mug in her hands. It tasted just the same as before, but she had already lost her appetite for it. "It's late. Let's head to the city hall." Ethan looked somewhat annoyed. "Aren't you going to drink it?" "I don't feel like it," Olivia said. Back then, he would have coaxed her with all the patience he had. Now, he simply glanced at her and poured the cider into the sink. His face was like a blank slate when he walked past her and said, "Let's go." "Send this to Collington Cove," Ethan said as he passed the thermos flask to Brent. "All right, Mr. Miller." It was at this moment that Olivia knew that there was nothing she could do to mend the tear in their relationship. The years she spent trying to fix things was nothing but a joke. Olivia quickly walked to the car. As she passed the apple tree, the wind blew, and the last leaves of the tree fell from its branches. Olivia raised a hand to catch one of the leaves. Softly, she said to herself, "What are you even holding on to?" Then she tossed it to the ground and crushed it beneath her feet. She closed the door of the car. Even though it was warm inside, just the way that she and Ethan sat at both ends of the passenger seat like the North and South Poles was enough to have the air feel as chilly as the weather outside. The journey to the city hall was smooth and without much traffic. It was as if God was paving the way for their divorce because the traffic lights were green all the way. As the car was taking a turn at the intersection, nearing their destination, Ethan's phone started ringing. Marina's voice came from the other end of the line. "Ethan, Connor's down with a fever. I didn't want to disturb you, but his fever is now at 103 degrees. I'm so scared. Hurry over." "I'm coming." Ethan hung up, his eyes meeting Olivia's gaze. Her eyes were glassy, but the hatred in them was as clear as day. She spoke slowly, enunciating each word. "What's the child's name?" It was dead silent in the car. Marina's voice was loud as she was anxious, so Olivia managed to hear her say the name Connor. She remembered the day she received her pregnancy report. She had run into Ethan's embrace and told him about it. "Ethan, you're going to be a father. We're having a baby." Her voice was filled with enthusiasm. "I've thought of our child's name. It'll be Colette if she's a girl and Connor if she's a boy. What do you think?" Oh, how she wished she had misheard Marina, but Ethan looked her right in the eyes and told her, "His name's Connor." "You asshole." Olivia's hand was already in the air. She slapped him, yet he did not flinch, letting her do as she pleased. "How could you name her child after our own?" The thought of her child was Olivia's final straw. Tears streamed down her cheeks uncontrollably, and she pounced on him as if she had gone crazy. "You devil! Why did God take away my child from me? Why weren't you the one who died?" She landed hit after hit on him as she yelled, "He doesn't deserve that name." Ethan grabbed both her hands and told Kelvin, "Head to Collington Cove." This made Olivia go berserk. "We're close to the city hall already. Settle our divorce first before you head elsewhere. His fever won't go down. I must go back now. My father's lying unconscious in the hospital, yet the nurses wouldn't even let me anywhere near the hospital because of the bills. Are you saying that your child's life is important, but my father's life is nothing?" Olivia yelled in his face. Ethan's face darkened at the mention of Olivia's father. "How dare you compare your father to Connor?" In a fit of rage, Olivia raised her hand to slap him again, but he gripped her wrist tightly. "Are you done?" he shouted. The car took a turn, and Olivia watched as they moved further and further away from the city hall. Ethan locked her tightly in his arms, restraining her movements and preventing her from struggling free. Long ago, she would be happy and content in his arms, but they were nothing more than shackles to her now. His arms were strong, and with how frail she was right now, she could not break free. Helpless, she hollered, "Do you love Marina that much?" However, Ethan was stunned, for when he held Olivia, he found that she had not only gotten just a bit slimmer, she was way bonier than she was a year ago. She was paper thin, and he could feel her bones prodding him through her clothes. The woman he once pampered so much was now so skinny and frail. Was this truly what he wanted? He was just starting to doubt himself when the image of his sister's corpse flashed across his mind. His grip on Olivia's waist tightened a little. When he raised his head to look at her again, all that was left in his eyes was an endless pool of darkness. "Believe it or not, I'll have someone remove your father's breathing tube right now if you continue making a fuss." Olivia fell silent then. Her hands clutched his clothes tightly as her tears soaked his shirt. It was funny how he was the one who used to say that he would never make her cry, but he was now the reason behind all her tears. The silence in the car was suffocating. Olivia finally managed to calm herself down, pushing him away before straightening her back. She then sniffed and said, "It's your business if you want to go to your child. However, you can't ruin our plan. Stop worrying about me not letting you go because I'm going to divorce you no matter what. I don't have the habit of keeping someone else's trash." Ethan frowned at the word trash, but Olivia ignored him and carried on with her speech. "I admit that I've been too naive in the past to pin my hopes on you. I've seen everything now. Holding on is meaningless, so I'll let things go. Give me the money, and we'll deal with the formalities later on. I promise I'll be there in a call. I won't go back on my word." "What if I don't want to?" Olivia looked into his dark, unsettling eyes. The tears that she wept just now made her eyes clearer than ever. Coolly, she met his gaze and said, "Then I'll jump out of the car. I'd rather die if I couldn't save my father." Only then did Ethan take out a check and write on it, "I'll wire you the other $5 million after we're divorced." Olivia laughed mockingly at him. "Are you so afraid that I wouldn't divorce you? Don't worry. I'll sooner take my own life than stay beside a man like you." "Stop the car." She grabbed the check from his hands, slammed the door shut, and left without looking back. Finally, she could save her father's life. She went to cash the check and rushed to the hospital to settle her father's medical fees. She then called a cab and headed to the address Brent had given her. It was a private, high-end cemetery. Those buried here were either affluent or filthy rich. Ethan's late grandma was buried here. Olivia bought a bouquet of his grandma's favorite bluebells. It was not long before she managed to find a grave that looked fairly new, which was surrounded by a circle of plum trees. The trees were full of flower buds that would bloom very soon, A name was carved on the gravestone: Leah Miller. Olivia knew Ethan adored his sister and that her going missing had been a topic of taboo to everyone around him. It was exactly why she did not know anything about his sister. Leah. Was this her name? Olivia had never heard of it. She crouched down to look at the photo on the gravestone. It looked like it was taken before she went missing when she was 5 or 6 years old. Her face was chubby and cute, and her eyes were somewhat similar to Ethan's. Olivia had no idea what she could use this information for. She took a picture of Leah's photo with her phone, considering it a clue. Then, she placed the bouquet of flowers that she had bought for Ethan's late grandmother, Eugenia Miller, on the ground. She knelt by the grave and started rambling. "Hi, Leah, I'm Olivia, your sister-in-law." Scratch that. It should be your ex-sister-in-law now. "Sorry for meeting you in such a state. I promise I'll help you find the real culprit who did this to you." Olivia then went to Eugenia's grave, which was not too far away. In her photo, the old lady looked as amiable and kind as ever, her smile warm and comforting. Olivia fished out some roasted marshmallows from earlier in the morning and placed it in front of the grave. "Grandma, I'm here to visit you. It's winter now, but since you're no longer here to steal the marshmallows from me, they've all become tasteless." After standing for some time, Olivia started feeling tired, so she ended up sitting by the grave. It was as though Grandma was still alive, and Olivia was reminiscing with her. "Grandma, I'm sorry I couldn't keep the child. But that bastard Ethan has had 2 more children already. So you don't have to worry about the bloodline anymore." Olivia continued, "He's changed. He's no longer the person I knew. Back then, he told me that he would defend me from anything and everything, but all the sufferings I face now are brought by him. If you were alive, you wouldn't let him treat me like this, right?" She forced a smile and said, "Ethan and I are getting divorced soon. You always said that if he wronged me, you'd crawl out from your coffin and kick his ass. My days are numbered, so I'm coming to find you soon. Then we can crawl out from the ground and kick his ass together. What do you say?" Once again, Olivia looked at the photo of the old lady with a kind smile. "What does it feel like to die? Is it dark? I'm scared of bugs that would bite on me. What should I do? How about I bring you lots of flowers now, and you'll help me to chase the bugs away when I join you on the other side?" She looked up into the sky. "I miss you, Grandma." Olivia stayed before the grave for quite some time before leaving. She did not have time to wallow in sorrow for too long. She had an investigation to carry out now that she had the photo. Most of the women her dad was in touch with worked in his company, so it was natural that Olivia started from there. But just as she started to search for a way to contact them, her phone started ringing. It was one of the children from the countryside whose education her father had sponsored back then. His voice was rather anxious. "Miss Fordham, I just returned from overseas and heard that Mr. Fordham is gravely ill. Is he all right? Thanks for your concern. My father's still getting treatment at the hospital. Gosh, how could someone as kind as him get into such a situation? If it wasn't for him sponsoring our studies years back, we wouldn't be where we are today." A thought flashed across Olivia's mind. In the past, her father had helped children in the countryside to move to the city for their studies, so Leah could have known him since she was abducted and taken to the countryside. "Ryan, do you know those who were sponsored by my father? I've been helping Mr. Fordham contact them all along. I know most of them, but I've lost contact with them after going abroad for the past few years. Is there anything I can help you with, Ms. Fordham? I'll do everything in my power to help you." Olivia felt as though she just found herself a sliver of hope. Immediately, she told him, "I have a picture with me. Can you see if she's one of the students my father sponsored before?" Sure thing, Ms. Fordham. In just half an hour after sending him the picture, Ryan had sent Olivia the information she wanted. The girl in the picture he sent had bright eyes that were similar to Leia and Ethan. Her name was Jody, and she came from a poor family. Olivia's father had sponsored her education 12 years ago. She had been a brilliant student from a young age and managed to get a spot in many of the top universities in the nation, so she chose to further her studies in the country. Perhaps this was the person Olivia was looking for. In a hurry, she asked Ryan to meet up with her in a cafe. Ryan arrived on time. This was the first time in 10 years that Olivia met him in person. Back then, he was still a bashful boy, very unlike the smart-looking man in a suit who was the president of his own company sitting before her. Even though the Fordhams had fallen into bankruptcy, he still addressed her courteously. "Sorry to keep you waiting, Ms. Fordham. I've only just arrived. I won't beat around the bush. Are you still in contact with Jody?" "I used to be. I seldom contacted my friends in the country when I stayed overseas. We haven't talked in at least 2 years. Do you know how she's doing these days? I've only just returned a few days ago. I wouldn't have known about your family's situation if it weren't for my friends. Jody and I aren't close, though. At most, I only contacted the others because of Mr. Fordham." Ryan took a sip from the cup of coffee and cleared his throat. "But since you requested it, I tried asking around in her circle. Sadly, she's dead. What a shame. Her grades were excellent, and she would have had a bright future ahead of her if she were alive." "How did she die?" "I'm not sure of the cause of her death, but I heard that she was fished out of the sea." Olivia frowned, her forehead wrinkling. Not only did she not find the answers she was looking for, but more questions also began to come up. Leia was kidnapped when she was almost 6 years old, so she should have remembered what had happened to her. If her father had sponsored her studies, why didn't she ask for help? Why did she not return to the Millers when she came to the city? Besides, what did Olivia's father have to do with Jody's death? "Was my father kind to her?" Olivia asked tentatively. Jody came from a poor background and was orphaned at a young age. She scored well in her exams and made her way into the city all alone. Mr. Fordham was very kind to her. I heard that she was rather reserved and was ostracized by her roommates, so Mr. Fordham rented her a small apartment so that she could excel in her studies, Ryan explained. Then, he set his cup down and asked, "Why are you so curious about her?" "I just want to find out the cause of her death so that she wouldn't die in vain," Olivia explained. She had planned to leave this world peacefully after getting $10 million from her divorce to settle her funeral. Now, she had something else in mind. She wanted to clear her father's name and take revenge for her family. Even if Ethan refused to tell her the truth, she would find it out herself. Ryan looked as if he suddenly recalled something. He took out a name card from his wallet and passed it to Olivia. "One of my friends is a renowned private detective. He could be of help if you wish to find out about anything." "Thank you, Ryan. No worries. I know Jody, and I wish for her to go peacefully too. I'll be staying in the country for some time, so just message me if you need anything. I have a meeting soon, so I'll be taking my leave. See you later." After seeing him off, Olivia called the private detective and sent the information she got over to him. Presently, she was in high spirits. When she arrived at the hospital, Dr. Freeman called her to his office. Olivia had an ominous feeling about this. Anxiously, she asked, "How's my father's condition? When can he wake up?" "Ms. Fordham, you need to be mentally prepared. Even though Mr. Fordham's surgery was a success, he hit his head during the car crash, which triggered an aftereffect. He shows no signs of waking up, and He may not ever wake up again. Olivia thought her heart had fallen into a perpetual abyss. Her grip on the disposable paper cup loosened, and her hands started to tremble. Seeing her reaction, Dr. Freeman could not help but let out a sigh. "Don't lose hope. I'm just saying that it's a possibility. He should be fine if he wakes up by the end of this month." When she raised her head, Olivia's eyes were clouded with tears. She croaked, "He'll be in a coma if he can't wake up, right?" "Yes. So, I hope you'll be prepared for this and have things planned out." Dr. Freeman knew that it was not easy to earn money these days and that spending it on a person in comatose was not necessary. Olivia abruptly shot up from her seat and slammed her hands on the table. "No matter what happens, I won't give up on my father. I believe that miracles do happen." Then she dashed out of the office. She never thought that things would take a turn for the worse. If her father couldn't wake up, she'd never get to hear him speak the truth. If so, she could not die just yet. She rushed off to the oncology department. Keith had just finished diagnosing one of his patients when Olivia barged into the room. "Keith, help me." Keith looked at her anxious face and her hands that tugged at his sleeve. Olivia spoke calmly and firmly as though she had found her salvation. "Be it chemotherapy or surgery, I'll do anything as long as I can have more time to live." Only by living would she have the time to find out the truth and accompany her father for a longer time. Keith did not understand what she had been through, but as long as she had the will to live, he, as a doctor, was positively delighted. "All right, I'll arrange your first chemotherapy session right away." Keith scheduled Olivia's first round of chemo for the day after tomorrow to prevent her condition from deteriorating. The chemo would come with a plethora of side effects. In the first 2 weeks, the patient would feel weak and experience hair loss. That was why Olivia would have to get everything sorted out before the session. Although Jeff was still in a coma, at least Olivia didn't need to worry about paying off his medical bills. She made a payment at the hospital before heading back to the home that she used to share with Ethan. She was worried that she might be too weak after chemo. Hence, she booked the services of a moving company before starting chemo. She was planning to move out of this place anyway. Olivia's best friend, Everly Hilton, showed up in office wear. She strutted around in heels while clutching a crossbody. At the same time, she happened to be carrying 2 bags of chips as well. Olivia immediately heard her friend's loud voice from afar. "Liv, you are finally free of suffering. I just received the commission from my property sale last month, so let me treat you to a fun night at the Dark Horse Clubhouse today. There are so many guys out there for you." Everly did not know about Olivia's diagnosis because she went abroad to visit her boyfriend in the same week Olivia hid away. She simply thought that Olivia had given it a good thought and decided to go for a divorce. Olivia chuckled in response. "No, that won't work. I'm scared that your beau might show up and knock on my door right away when he hears about that." "Oh, drop it. I will never believe in long-distance relationships anymore. I wanted to show up and surprise him, but guess what? That fucker took my hard-earned commissions and spent it all on another bitch." Everly looked vicious, yet her eyes were filled with pain. Her 7-year relationship was over, all because they went long distance. Olivia wanted to offer words of comfort, but at the thought of her messy marriage, she felt that she didn't have the right to reassure others. Instead, she remarked, "Knowing you, you must have caused quite a scene." Everly led Olivia over to the bench by the flower garden and took a seat. She gave Olivia a bag of chips while she started eating out of the other. "My temper has long mellowed after all these years of a long-distance relationship. I had a bad feeling about this whole thing anyway. You can fall in love for many reasons, but you only need one to fall out of it. She stared into the misty sky and went on. At the beginning, he'd fly across the globe just to see me on Valentine's Day, even if he only had a few days off. Now, he hasn't come home once in 3 years. He'd wished me good morning before he went to bed, but he didn't text me as much in the last few years. I thought he was busy with his PhD studies, so I started working part-time as a property agent just to support him financially, all while studying full-time. Everly's sadness intensified. What haven't I done for money? And with the money from my commissions, I even bought him a house abroad. Liv, this storyline is right out of a soap opera. She continued to lament. At one point, I thought I'd go mad. It was quite ridiculous, catching him cheating in the boxers that I bought for him. Everly was grinning, but tears rolled off her cheeks onto the bag of chips in her hand. I had to think twice before buying coffee. I lived so frugally just to support him. But what did I get in the end? I'm a prestigious med school student who was rushing between apartment viewings just to support a traitor. He might have even bought the condoms with my card. Olivia reached out to hug her best friend. Oh, please don't cry. He isn't worth your time. That's what I think too. Do you know how nice I was to him? I did not make a scene. I lit a cigarette and started calculating the money he had to pay me back. Thank God I put the house under my name. I evicted him and that bitch that same night. Olivia was rather taken aback by Everly's decisiveness. So, did he agree to everything? Of course not. He immediately fell to his knees and wanted me to forgive him when I asked for the house and money back. When I saw him crying in front of me, I wondered what made me fall for him in the first place. Anyway, I stayed around for a couple of days to sell off the house and cut all ties with him before I came home. Everly quickly wiped away her tears and continued, Liv, we're long past the age of believing in romantic love. We have to choose between love and bread, right? You didn't like it when I told you to get a divorce a year ago, so I'm glad that you finally thought it through. Just from your divorce settlement with Ethan Miller alone, you would be able to last for a few lifetimes and then some. Everly smiled once she finished her last chip. Look, even if you lost your man, you could spend his hard-earned wealth on 10 different smoking hot dudes. Isn't that awesome? Olivia coughed awkwardly. I only got $10 million from Ethan. What? The audacity of that cheating bastard to offer you only $10 million. Everly gasped in disbelief. Wasn't he very generous to you? Since when did he become so stingy? It's not like he's short of money. Olivia didn't explain further. When a man's in love, he'll give you the moon. When he's no longer into you, you're worse than trash. Let's not talk about him. I wanted you here to help me with moving out. Sure, I'll treat you to a nice dinner after this. Olivia smiled. Okay. Almost everything in the villa belonged to Ethan, so there wasn't much for her to pack. It was less of a move out and more of a dropping by to pick up her belongings. A wedding photo was hung on the wall. Olivia could be seen smiling brightly in the photo. Even Ethan, who always looked serious, managed to crack a smile too. The thought of Ethan and his affair pissed Everly off. How are you going to deal with these wedding photos? I mean, you can always recycle them in exchange for some money for chips. Or maybe set them on fire. Olivia shook her head. It's okay. Everything should be split into half in a divorce. She ordered a housekeeper to take out all the photos from their frames, cut out her images, and put the photos back. The only room that she was reluctant to leave behind was her self-designed nursery that Ethan helped decorate. She didn't want Marina's child to move into that nursery. 1 year after setting up the nursery, she finally decided to move the cot out and had the movers remove all the decorations in there. Surprisingly enough, it only took a few hours to remove the things that took countless days and sleepless nights to create. The memories that had accumulated over the entire year went into the trash can alongside those things as well. Standing at the entrance to the villa, she recalled the excitement when she had first moved in. Her sorrows were a vast contrast to the joy on her move-in day. She probably hadn't imagined her marriage headed toward destruction. Taking a final look, she bid goodbye to her past self and left. She then walked up to Everly. "Eve, come with me to the salon." Everly patted her on the shoulder. "Great. Let's celebrate your new start with new hair. Time to put those bastards behind us. I'm going to dye my hair a nice shade of pink. What about you, Liv?" Olivia replied without hesitation, "I want it short." "Liv, you look good either way, but don't cut it too short. I'm worried that you might regret it." Little did Everly know that Olivia wanted the short hair because she was worried about the extensive hair loss post-chemo. Olivia smiled. "No, I won't regret it." Everly and Olivia, both having suffered from disastrous relationships, went to the salon. Everly picked out 2 male hairstylists for them. One of the hairstylists lit up with excitement at the sight of Olivia and immediately recommended some trending hairstyles. She outright rejected the suggestion. "I want it short as possible. Darling, I know the cool girl look is trendy, but getting a pixie cut might limit the outfit styles you can pull off. Why don't I give you a shoulder-length cut? You'll look younger and can rock it at any event." "It's fine. Your hair is long and luscious. I can tell that you have kept it for years. It's really a pity to cut it off." The stylist shook his head regretfully. Olivia stared at her reflection in the mirror. Despite her lack of rest, her features still looked as exquisite as ever. Her tresses, which she hadn't taken care of, tumbled across her shoulders. It made her look demure. She hadn't cut her hair in years because Ethan loved her long hair. Since the stylist was reluctant to cut it off, she grabbed the scissors and said, "I'll do it myself." She cut off her hair without hesitation, sending the long locks fluttering onto the ground. It somehow symbolized her parting ways with her lovely youth and innocence. She returned the scissors to the guy and allowed him to proceed with styling her. "All right, I'll leave the rest to you." When Everly emerged with her new pink hair, she was shocked at Olivia's new hairstyle and marveled at it. "Wow. It's true you can really rock any style if you're good looking. Liv, you look so cool." Everly's next order of business was to hurry to the supermarket and buy some gender-neutral clothes for Olivia to match the new middle-part pixie cut. Their new styles attracted lots of attention when they walked down the streets later in the day. When night fell, Everly took a selfie with Olivia by a storefront and uploaded it to her Instagram. The post was captioned, "Reborn." She also splurged on a fancy steak dinner with Olivia. It was something she had wanted to devour for a long time. The nice meal put a smile on her face. "Liv, doesn't this feel like we're back in high school? Our biggest worry at that time was solving calculus problems. Now that you think about it, that isn't tough at all. Just use the right formula, and you have your answer. Unlike men, you give your all to men, and all you get in return is heartbreak." Olivia had not drunk in a long time, but she decided to let it go just for that night. She took a sip and joked, "That's because you sucked at math. I never thought calculus was hard." Yeah, no one can beat you, genius. You were only 13 when you joined us in high school. I thought someone from middle school got lost on their way to class. I wasn't expecting a gifted kid." Then, Everly poured Olivia a drink and lifted her glass. "Genius or idiot, it doesn't matter. Let's raise a glass to our singlehood. I can finally buy whatever I want now that I've kicked that weasel out of my life." However, tears streamed down Everly's face as she was celebrating her newfound freedom. "Liv, did you know that I used to buy the lowest grade steak on sale at the grocery store? I saved my ass off to support his studies, and I gave my all to build our future. I'm only 24 this year, yet I've never even gotten myself a proper dress. How could he do this to me? They all faced challenges in their lives. Olivia, who was struggling with troubles of her own, had no better advice for her friend than to gently advise Everly to look to the future. She had wanted to send Everly home, but the tipsy girl forcefully dragged her to the Dark Horse clubhouse. She sighed, knowing that Everly just needed an emotional release. After all, she had 1 full year to process the breakdown of her marriage, but Everly only had very little time to wrap up the loose ends with her boyfriend abroad and rush home. She must have needed more time to get over it. Olivia did not object to the detour because she knew that she couldn't have fun with Everly for a long time after chemo, and that was if she survived it. That night, she went to a clubhouse for the first time. The overexcited Everly patted her hand and squealed, "Look at the usher. Isn't he handsome?" However, her attention was on the painting of a dark horse in the center of the lobby. "Yeah," she absent-mindedly agreed with Everly. "Just let loose and have fun. If I have to pay for a man, I'd rather it go to a hot one that's good at sweet talk. Don't you think so?" "You're absolutely right." Everly, who wouldn't even pay for a cab in the past, transformed into a generous millionaire overnight. She led Olivia into a spacious lounge, where she ordered 10 bottles of Armand de Brignac in one go and ignored Olivia's attempt at stopping her. The clubhouse manager politely introduced 10 male models to them, each with a distinct style, ranging from sweet to chic. Everly declared boldly, "Pick whoever you like." The men openly flirted with them, and some even showed off their abs. Olivia was too shy to even look at them. "It's all right. I'll just have a few drinks." Everly picked 2 men and slammed a wad of cash on the table. She ordered, "Come here. Keep her happy tonight." The 2 men looked like boys next door, which was very different from Ethan's cool image. They took their seats beside Olivia, sandwiching her, and one of them poured her a drink. She felt uneasy and wanted to leave, but Aunt Everly slapped her on the thigh. "What's wrong? Are you really going to save yourself for Ethan? Has he ever thought of you when he was sleeping with other women? What are you worried about now that you're divorced? Just let go and have fun. I'll foot the bill." It was general knowledge that property agents marked up prices for a better profit margin. On top of that, Everly sold villas, and she'd frequently receive hundreds of thousands in commission from her deals. Since she was young, pretty, and a smooth talker, she raked in a lot of money from her commissions. Had she not spent that money on her ex, she would have been considered a self-made millionaire. Therefore, she could totally afford a night of extravagant spending, and that was what she had decided on. Meanwhile, at Collington Cove, the baby's fever finally wore off after the doctor's close supervision over the day. Ethan let out a sigh of relief and tucked the baby in before tiptoeing out of the bedroom. Marina went up to him with a warm smile. "Ethan, it's late. Why don't you stay the night? I'm worried that the baby will wake up at night. You know he doesn't cry much when you're around." He rubbed his temples, looking worn out. "I still need to attend an engagement. Dr. Garcia will be around, so get him if you need anything." Marina looked like she had something to say, but she knew she couldn't force him to stay. She had thought that he'd have gotten divorced when she called him at 10:30 p.m., but things didn't go her way. She reminded herself to take it slow and replied thoughtfully, "Sure. Just be careful on your way back." He nodded and got into the car. Brent immediately handed him a key. "Mrs. Miller has returned the key to the villa." The look in Ethan's eyes hardened before he snorted. "She sure moves fast after she's paid." Brent didn't want to continue the conversation, but the thought of Everly's Instagram post bothered him. After a moment's thought, he blurted out, "But Mr. Miller, she seems to have completely given up on you." When Brent felt Ethan's chilling gaze on him, he had to explain. "Mr. Miller, she's with Everly." It wasn't unusual for Olivia to hang out with her best friend, Everly. Ethan had asked Brent to follow Everly on Instagram to monitor Olivia's move. While explaining, Brent showed his boss Everly's Instagram post. In one of them, Everly showed off her eye-catching pink curls, but Ethan was instantly drawn to Olivia, who was rocking a different style in the photo. She had gotten a middle-part pixie cut, which coupled with her tiny face made her look more morose than her usual sunny disposition. Her eyes were looking downward, and her collarbone was visible through her Oxford shirt in the photo. Her beauty was almost sacred. The caption read "Reborn." Ethan hadn't realized that his fingers were trembling slightly. After a year of being pestered by her, he should have felt relieved that she wanted to let go. But why did he feel suffocated instead? He reminded himself that his sister was gone. Olivia did not have the right to declare her rebirth. He convinced himself that he wasn't feeling bad for Olivia, he just wanted revenge. He wasn't done with torturing her yet, and he would not let this slip. Deep in his thoughts, he was interrupted by Brent's remark. Miss Hilton brought Mrs. Miller to the Dark Horse Clubhouse. Brent clicked on an Instagram post that showed Olivia lazing on a soft couch in a dimly lit room while a handsome young man in white kneeled on one knee and fed her grapes. Ethan almost crushed the phone after seeing the photo. Go to the clubhouse. The air turned frosty, and he couldn't take his mind off the young man in white. He knew he'd make Olivia weak in the knees when he put on a white shirt, and she'd sometimes sketch the image of his teenage self in a white shirt. It was at that moment he realized that he didn't want a divorce at all. Not only that, but he also wanted to keep her by his side forever. He wanted to subject her to daily torture to atone for Jeff's sin. While Ethan was fuming, Brent held his breath in the car. He was confused by the situation. In the past 2 years, Ethan was good to Marina and fulfilled all her demands, but he didn't seem to have any affection for her. On the other hand, Ethan gave Olivia the cold shoulder, but Brent could tell that she was Ethan's one true love. Alas, Ethan, blinded by hate, would do anything to hurt Olivia. When Ethan rushed to the Dark Horse Clubhouse, the two women were nowhere to be seen. Apparently, Olivia had to bring Everly home because the latter was making a scene after getting drunk. Not knowing that he missed them, he ordered his men to look around but found no one. Brent called up the hotels across the city and got nothing too. "Mr. Miller, she must have found a new place to stay in advance. It'll take some time to find a rental if you're doing it without an agent." The look in Ethan's eyes darkened when he realized that she planned to leave for good once she received the compensation. "Look into it. Find her, no matter what it takes." The good news was that Olivia hadn't left the premises with a male escort. Still, those who entertained Olivia were tied up and brought to Ethan, who lit a cigar and stared at the two trembling men through the wisps of smoke. "Lift your heads." The poor men never thought that they'd get into trouble with a big shot. And shaking violently, they stammered, "Mr. Miller. Where did you touch her?" "And no, we didn't. The lady did not like touching and kept a distance from us. She had a few drinks before leaving with her friend." Ethan snickered and lifted the chin of one host. He examined the young man's face, which was caked in makeup. The man also smelled of cloying and cheap perfume. Ethan remarked, "Why would she eat the grapes fed to her by a cheap, trashy man like you?" The young man was on the brink of tears. Ethan made it worse when he announced, "Cut his fingers off. Mr. Miller, please spare me." Thankfully, Brent intervened and showed Ethan the surveillance footage of the lounge. Mrs. Miller did not have physical contact with them. 2 of the men were already sobbing. They hadn't expected to have their fingers cut off just because they fed their client grapes. All they wanted was to latch onto some rich lady, get their share of the money, and retire comfortably. They finally welcomed a beautiful and stylish young lady today, but sadly, she didn't even look at them despite their best efforts to woo her. Not only that, but they also had to deal with a devil after she left. Talk about unlucky. Ignoring them, Ethan went back to his car and drove around the city aimlessly. Where would Olivia go when she had no place to crash at? After Jeff was placed in the ICU, she did not need to be at the hospital to take care of him. Her phone was turned off. Clueless, he went to almost all the places they had visited before. After a futile search, he returned to their newlywed home. He had only stopped by shortly on that night. It had been a while since he visited the villa. Only the furniture was left behind. The interior seemed spotless and devoid of human touch. It was her habit to arrange fresh flowers on the dining table daily, but even the vase was gone. In the empty and lonely master bedroom, her presence was removed from all their wedding photos. Only Ethan was left in the photos, looking both eerie and lonely. Even after the Fordhams went bankrupt, she never took any of the branded clothes he bought for her and only packed some cheap clothes to go. He then remembered that he had ordered the luxury bags and jewelry to be collected from the villa. She had also returned her diamond ring to him. It was her only possession that was worth something. Her toothbrush, cup, and towels were gone from the bathroom. His electric toothbrush looked lonely on the shelf. Next, he shuffled to the nursery that was once Olivia's faith, not noticing that the palms of his hands were slightly sweaty. The door clicked open, and he was greeted by an empty nursery, a sight that made his blood run cold. She had cut off all her ties to him. "Mr. Miller, don't worry. I checked with all the airline, train, and bus operators. There was no trace of Mrs. Miller purchasing tickets anywhere. Since Mr. Fordham is still warded, she won't leave the city." Ethan belatedly found out the reason he did not kill Jeff despite being fully capable of doing so. Perhaps, he subconsciously felt that Jeff was Olivia's Achilles heel. By keeping Jeff alive, he could keep Olivia under his thumb. "Find her and bring her to me." "Roger that." Ethan lay on the bed in the master bedroom. The nights when they slept separately were difficult for him too. Even though he knew that Olivia was innocent, he could not get over the fact that she was related to Jeff. Her happiness reminded him of his poor sister. It was Olivia's fault for being born as Jeff's daughter, and she should be held accountable for her father's sin. He had an equally intense love and hate for her as he released his pent-up grief and anger by torturing her. Perhaps, it was time for a new punishment. Everly was an exceptionally bad drunk. If it wasn't for Olivia, she would have gone at it with the men in the lounge. It was the first time Olivia saw her friend hugging a man and wailing about being an empty nester. Olivia had no choice but to bring her drunk friend back to her new rental. A while back, Jeff's caregiver found out that Olivia was looking for apartments for rent and recommended the apartment of a relative to her. Olivia settled on the apartment because she could save on agent fees. Moreover, the deal was backed by the caregiver, whom she trusted. Since her landlord wouldn't be back in the country anytime soon, Olivia had not officially signed the lease, but she received his approval via WhatsApp and moved in. Without signing any lease, she left no records behind for Ethan to track her down. The tiny apartment was a far cry from her family home at the height of their fortune, and it was no match for the villa she shared with Ethan. Still, it was cozy, and she liked it enough. She even kept her dad's favorite tropical fish in the apartment. Whenever she opened the windows, she'd have a full view of the ocean. Once, she thought that Collington Cove was Ethan's gift for her. Later, she was aghast to learn that Marina had returned to the country and moved into that place right away. The fact made her miserable for a long time, but she was finally over it. Be it living in an expensive or affordable apartment, she could still enjoy the same ocean view. The apartment came with a small balcony, where she lay down some thick rugs. She had initially planned to bring Jeff home when his condition stabilized. She'd like him to spend his retirement at her place, sunbathing on the balcony and enjoying life. Too bad things took a turn for the worse. The cancer diagnosis came out of the blue, and she never thought that her dad would remain in the ICU. The drinking made her feel a little queasy, so she took some medicine and lay on the mattress by the cot she placed in her room. It wasn't the most comfortable arrangement, but that was the only way she'd get some shut-eye. Thanks to the alcohol, she had a good sleep and woke up late. Everly woke up earlier and made her some breakfast. No one breached the topic of the wild night. Adults seem to be good at hiding their insecurities during the day. After breakfast, Everly rushed to the entrance with a pair of heels in her hands and a piece of toast in her mouth. She mumbled, "Breakfast's ready. I'm running late. Liv, I gotta go now." Olivia called out to her, "Eve, I probably can't keep you company for the next few days because I'll be busy." "Don't sweat about it. Do you really think I'm so into splurging? Yesterday's celebration was a grand farewell to our youth. I woke up a new person today, ready to work. I'd take money over men any day. But you have to tell me if you need help, all right? I don't want you struggling to juggle a few jobs." "Yeah, got it." Olivia saw her friend at the door, where they gave each other a soft hug. "Eve, you'll find a better man. You have to go through the pain to find your real happiness." Everly scoffed. "Oh, that's a bit rich coming from you. You can't even keep your perfect husband. Let's see if you'll find yourself a man as good as him in the future." "In the future?" Olivia looked at the sun and smiled gently. "Who knows?" Everly was ready to leave but was stopped by the sight of Olivia's lonely figure. She gave Olivia a back hug and said, "I'll be busy for a couple of days too. When things cool down, I'll catch up with you. Take care, okay? It's going to snow soon. Even if no one's keeping you warm, you need to look out for yourself." "All right." After sending Everly, Olivia cleaned the apartment before switching on her phone. To her surprise, she found a missed call from Ethan. She assumed he had called to discuss the divorce, but unfortunately, she wouldn't have time for that in the next few days. Aside from Ethan, Chloe also made a lot of calls to her. Olivia called Chloe back, who picked up the call quickly. She sounded concerned. "Liv, why didn't you pick up my calls? I was worried about you for days. Do you need more money? I'll make a transfer." Olivia calmed down at the sounds of the ocean waves slapping against the rocks. In the many years after Chloe left, she felt very aggrieved, wondering why she was abandoned. She was in denial when she learned that Chloe was Marina's stepmother. Of all people, why Marina? But no amount of pain would change the reality. Olivia was helpless. She answered, "Mom, I'm fine. Don't worry. Ethan gave me some money. You don't have to think about Dad's hospital bills." Still, Chloe couldn't shake off the image of Olivia leaving in the rain. "Liv, where are you? I need to see you, and I'd like to make up for the years I wasn't around." Staring at the blue of the ocean, Olivia replied flatly, "Mom, you wouldn't have disappeared for years without a call if you had cared about me. And you would have visited Dad when you came back if you still cared. It's my fault for going to the wrong person out of panic. I reached out to you, forgetting that you've remarried. I will not repeat this mistake anymore. Liv, Mom, let's stay the way we were before. I'll take care of Dad. You never had a daughter like me, and I never had a mother like you." Rather than blaming Chloe for making her feel ashamed in front of Marina, she was angry at how Chloe went abroad and never kept in touch. When Olivia was at her worst, Chloe was by Marina's side, taking care of the daughter of another man. She couldn't blame Chloe for the decision, but she would never let it slip. After hanging up, Olivia called her workplace to quit her part-time job. Finally, she texted Ethan, telling him to discuss the divorce another day because she'd be busy. No matter what the truth was, she and Ethan were over. They'd never remain friends, much less rekindle the relationship. When she took care of everything, she departed for the hospital. Keith noticed that she came alone. Her shadows were elongated under the sunlight, and that made her look more vulnerable. He suppressed his feelings and asked her gently, "Are you scared?" "A little, at first. But I'll feel reassured if you're around." "Don't worry. I'm the one who worked on the drugs for your chemo. I'll try my best to make it effective with the least side effects." "Thank you, Keith." When she arrived at the inpatient ward, she felt as though she was in a war zone. She had never seen that many patients, who varied in gender and age but shared a similarity, each wore a wig or headwear. A couple of unbothered middle-aged male patients swung past the corridors with their bald heads. Most rooms were occupied by patients undergoing chemo. Some were weeping, and some stared blankly out of the window. Olivia knew that she'd join them soon. The light would disappear from her eyes, and she'd lose hope for life as she staggered toward another day. With Keith's help, she secured a single room. The young nurse was polite to her. "You're Miss Fordham, right? Dr. Rogers told us about you. Please get ready over here. And have your family help you with the hospital admission and make payments at the pharmacy." Most patients at the hospital had at least one family member with them. She was the only one who showed up alone, which attracted many sympathetic looks. Those people must have pitied her for battling cancer and going through chemo alone. She bit her lips and said embarrassedly, "I don't have a family member with me. Just get me a caregiver." "That won't work. We need a family member to sign off." The nurse looked troubled. "How about your partner? Any parent or sibling?" Olivia stood there pitifully like a child whose parents skipped the parent-teacher conference. That was when Keith came forward and announced, "I'm family. I'll sign her forms." Olivia shot Keith a grateful look, and he nodded at her in acknowledgement before turning around to help her with the hospitalization matters. The nurse patiently explained the process to her. "Ms. Fordham, you will need to receive treatment over the long term. We will inject the chemo drugs into your body each time, but all the injections and the drugs will further harm your veins. In some serious cases, you will experience exosmosis. Just so you know, the drugs used are corrosive. To avoid those complications, we'd recommend inserting a medical port in your arm. We usually insert the port in advance to make sure that the drugs travel through your veins and into your organs." She continued, "The good thing is that the nurses won't struggle to find your veins down the road. It's convenient and safe. But on the flip side, you can't lift heavy weights with this arm in the future." Olivia agreed with the nurse and went under a minor surgery to insert the port in her arm. As she was allergic to anesthetics, she turned down anesthesia. When the blade slit through her thin skin, she merely frowned without so much as making a sound. The doctor couldn't help but comment, "It's rare to see someone who can take the pain." To that, she sighed. "Well, it's not like I have anyone who would care if I was hurt anyway." The conversation brought her back to a year ago when she had to undergo emergency surgery after falling into the water and suffering premature labor. Even after she was given anesthetics, she could vividly sense the pain when the blade sliced through her abdomen. That day, she fainted from the excruciating pain, only to wake up to the same sensation. Throughout the ordeal, her screams fell on deaf ears because Ethan chose to stay guard in front of Marina's delivery room. From then on, she learned not to make a sound even when she was in pain. The second day after chemo, she was besieged by an array of side effects. It was Keith who helped her to get discharged. Even the short distance from the inpatient department to the underground garage made her gasp for breath, resulting in multiple breaks in between. Any slight movement would make her dizzy and nauseous, and all her energy seemed to seep away. Keith sighed and got down on his knees to scoop her into his arms. Panicking, she rejected his help. "Keith, don't." This time, he sternly insisted on helping. "Your body is weak now. If you refuse my help, I will have no choice but to call your family for your safety. And right now, Ethan Miller is your only family who could drop by. Am I right?" It was an absurd situation. Without the signed divorce papers, Ethan remained legally her spouse and the only family member who could take care of her. "Don't let him know about my condition." Olivia was already a mess. Ethan would only feel gleeful upon hearing about her diagnosis. The last thing she wanted was to be laughed at. Keith cautiously saw her back to her apartment and advised her, "Olivia, you need a caretaker. You can't even take care of your meals now." She nodded. "I know. My friend's going to return from abroad. She'll take care of me." "Keith, you still need to work your shift, don't you? I shouldn't take up too much of your time." He checked his wristwatch and agreed it was about time to head back to work since he had some major surgeries scheduled. He gave her a few words of advice before leaving. After he left, Olivia lay in her bed alone as she grappled with the indescribable pain. She felt pain in every inch of her body. As she fought her dizzy vision, her abdomen roiled, and she was suffering from nausea. Even the wound on her arm was thudding in dull pain. Hellish was the only word she could describe it with. To her dismay, the only person she missed was Ethan. Back when she was suffering from acute appendicitis, he rushed her to the hospital in the middle of heavy snow. Still fussy and squeamish, she cried when she was wheeled into the operating theater, but he held her hand tightly and followed her into the room. In the end, the doctor performed the surgery under Ethan's gaze. This many years later, and she still recalled his expression when he soothed her. He said to her, "Don't worry, I'm here." After the surgery for her appendicitis, she could not walk for a month. Ethan was next to her the entire time and was attentive to all her needs. Years later now, he was with another woman, taking care of the children she bore for him. Olivia had to repeatedly remind herself of his infidelity and his cruelty to forget all the lovely memories she had of him. Fighting the debilitating pain, she stumbled down the bed and gritted her teeth, telling herself that she could do this. She would not let death get in the way of her pursuit of the truth. Her tears fell onto the pasta she took out to boil. The worst pain wasn't physical, it was the pain that he had inflicted on her. It felt like thousands of blades were cutting through her body, and the pain was suffocating. For 3 whole days, she writhed in pain on her bed. When she woke up on the 4th morning, she was glad to find that the pain had decreased, and her nausea seemed to have died down a little. Suddenly, she heard someone drawing the window curtains. It was Keith, who had regularly dropped by after work to take care of her. He brought some fresh produce and a bag of chips that she had been craving. His black wool coat was a little damp when he showed up in a hurry. Even his hair was a little moist. When he lowered his gaze to check on her, she spotted a snowflake in his thick and long lashes. "Is it snowing?" she muttered feebly. He nodded. "Yeah, it snowed for the whole night yesterday. When you feel better in a few days, we'll go check out the snow." "Great. I'm not in much pain today." Olivia sat up in bed, all huddled up in her thick pajamas. However, she was devastated to see a bunch of hair on her pillow when she turned around. Even when she had cut her hair short to prepare for this moment, she was taken aback by the sight. She hurriedly pulled her blanket to cover the pillow to avoid exposing the sad and embarrassing truth. A little floored, she mumbled, "All washed up." Keith had seen countless cancer patients who found it harder to cope with the loss of dignity than death itself. Sure, take your time. She shut the bathroom door and stared into her sickly face in the mirror. A chunk of hair easily fell out when she pulled on it tentatively. As a young lady in her prime years, she felt grim when she witnessed the hair loss. Before she knew it, she'd lose all her hair. That was when Olivia decided she had to finalize the divorce as soon as possible. It would be a nightmare to meet up with Ethan to settle the divorce after she went bald. Finally, she switched on her phone and, ignoring the piling messages, went on to call Ethan. Little did Olivia know that he had been searching high and low for her in the past few days. She did not even have to wait more than 3 seconds for him to pick up. She could hear his seething voice from the other end. Olivia Fordham, where the fuck were you? Ethan had tried to locate her for 4 full days. Instead of explaining herself, Olivia said to him with urgency, "Ethan, I'll wait for you at the city hall in an hour. I don't want to drag this out. Let's get a divorce." Before the meeting, Olivia put on some makeup for a healthier complexion. Looking at the flurry of snow out there, she wrapped herself up in layers of clothes for warmth. After chemo, her physical functions, which included her immune system, had deteriorated, and her body was as brittle as glass. She had to test her complete blood count for the ratio between her red and white blood cells every 2 days. If the ratio dipped below average, she would need to take medicine to boost it. Otherwise, her life would be in danger if she caught any illness because of how she was immunocompromised. She'd rather be safe than sorry and pick warmth over style. After touching the thinned hair at the back of her head, she carefully put on a black beanie. Keith wasn't keen about Olivia going out and protested, "Olivia, you're not in a condition to leave home. You did the complete blood count test yesterday, and your ratio is below average. As your leading physician, I'm responsible for your health." Olivia pleaded with misty eyes, "Keith, no one wants to show up in front of an ex looking miserable. I just want to part ways with him when I still look decent." He recalled the furtive manner she hid the hair on her pillow and sighed. "Just stay warm. I'm only finalizing the divorce. It'll be quick. I'll drop you off." This time around, she did not turn down his help. She was too preoccupied with getting the divorce done as soon as possible. Checking her messages in the car, she came across one from Everly, whose boyfriend flew home in an attempt to save the relationship and even made a scene at her workplace. Everly had no choice but to take a long leave to avoid that explained why she was nowhere to be seen for the past few days. Much to Olivia's surprise, Ethan sent her a bunch of text messages as well, and in some of them, he resorted to threatening her with Jeff's well-being if she did not reply to him. She dismissed his actions as his urgency in seeking a divorce, which she'd soon grant him. At the same time, the private detective Lee Coover did his job and sent files he'd organized to Olivia. The information showed that Jeff had been very close with Jody Ferguson because he spent a third of his time meeting up with her monthly. Surveillance footage captured him staying the night at Jody's place frequently. Not only that, he transferred money to her on multiple occasions and even registered a car worth $1 million under her name. Olivia was rather disturbed by the information. The interest that Jeff showed in Jody and the amount of money he sent her were inappropriate. It was odd for a wealthy middle-aged man to show such concern for a female who was young enough to be his daughter. On one hand, Olivia acknowledged that Jeff, who did not remarry, needed his needs met after her mom abandoned them, and she never questioned him on that. Just like other children, she revered her dad. Even when she knew that Jeff had his desires, she couldn't picture him sleeping with that young woman. From then on, her opinion of him changed a little. Since Jody was dead and Jeff was in a coma, Olivia had no choice but to assume they were lovers. Given that Jeff had always been kind and generous, he must have cared for and doted on Jody, who was way younger than him. Logically, he wouldn't have hurt the young lady. If so, why would Ethan want revenge against the Fordhams? Lee proved his capability with the extensive information he gathered within 3 days. Olivia paid part of the deposit and asked him to look into Jody's cause of death. After staring at the phone for a while, she felt a little nauseous, her head filled with images of the surveillance footage. Before this, she had faith in her dad's moral character, but after viewing the footage, she started having doubts. The city had been enveloped in snow, where darkness lurked underneath the pristine sheet of white. When they arrived at the city hall, Keith pulled over and held the car door for her, like the gentleman he was. In his eyes, she wasn't doing much better than she was days ago. She was as fragile as a porcelain doll. Be careful now. Go slow. The streets are slippery, so be on a lookout so that you don't slip. Olivia flashed him a grateful smile. Keith, you're fussing over nothing. I will be careful because I want to stay alive, more than anyone else. At least, she wanted to hang on until she arrived at the truth. Letting go of his hand, she turned around and immediately locked eyes with a man seated in a black car across the street. Ethan's piercing gaze was fixed on her hand that was held by Keith moments ago. The death stare sent a shiver down her spine, for she knew what he was capable of. Even if he hated her, he would never allow another man to touch her. That was why she refused Keith's offer to help. Sensing Ethan's burning gaze on her back, she hurriedly dismissed Keith. Don't you have a surgery to perform? I'll get a cab home when I've settled the divorce. You should leave. There's no rush. The surgery is in the afternoon. I'm worried about leaving you alone. Panicked, she put on a sour face. I'm not related to you in any way. Aren't you worried that people might gossip about us if you keep helping me out? I wouldn't have helped you if I were concerned about gossip. Well, I am. Keith, even if my relationship with Ethan has ended, I am still legally married to him. I don't want to be the center of gossip. Please leave me alone. My life is none of your business in the first place. Then, she left him behind with an air of indifference. Although Keith came from a family of doctors that were quite notable in the city, the Rogers were no match for the Millers. Olivia didn't want to cause a misunderstanding, which might result in Ethan giving Keith trouble. Feeling frustrated at her abrupt departure, Keith thought over her words. She wasn't wrong. He did not have the right to stay by her side. It wasn't until he left that he noticed an ultra-luxurious car parked by the street, and he instantly put the pieces together. Smiling helplessly, he understood that Olivia, still deep in love with Ethan, did not want to cause a misunderstanding. He turned the steering wheel and left the scene. Meanwhile, in the black car, Kelvin felt a pair of eyes staring at his nape. He was too afraid to turn around and take a look. He jolted in his seat when Ethan let out a scoff, and he stammered, Mr. Miller. What an eyesore. Kelvin was close to tears when he heard the remark. I'll get out of the car and let Brent take over. Seated beside Kelvin, Brent glared at his obtuse little brother before giving Ethan a slight nod. Noted on that, Mr. Miller. With that, Ethan left the car and walked into the flurry of snow. Kelvin smacked himself on the head when he realized that Ethan's remark was for Keith. Standing in front of the city hall, Olivia looked at the man who approached her with fear. Ethan's black coat stood out in the snow. His good-looking features were blurred by the torrent of snow. The sight of him made her nervous. He came closer and confronted her. Are you getting a divorce because of that man? Olivia lifted her head with a sarcastic smile on her lips. What a smart question. Did you forget that you were the one who wanted a divorce? He ignored her jibe and inched closer with a threatening air. Were you with him for the past few days? At the close distance, she noticed the iciness in his bloodshot eyes, and his face contorted into an aggressive scowl. She flatly denied. "Number. He dropped me off because it was hard to get a cab on a snowy day." Ethan smirked. "Olivia, don't you know that you always stare upward when you're lying? You haven't changed that habit at all. Did you suddenly agree to the divorce after 1 year of dragging your feet, all because of that man? Did you vanish and leave behind your dad because of him too?" Olivia did not bother to cook up an excuse, knowing that it'd only be an insult to Ethan's intelligence and make herself look guilty. She swiftly steered the topic of conversation. "That's not important. Let's get the divorce over with." He grasped her wrist to stop her. Even though he didn't use force, she felt the pain shooting through her arm, causing her to frown at him. There was a streak of madness in his face. He hissed coldly, "I thought that a divorce was the best punishment for you, but I have changed my mind." Caught by surprise, she blurted out, "What did you say?" He gave her a wicked look. "I don't want a divorce now." He brushed his slender fingers across her cheeks. "Mrs. Miller, does that make you happy?" She would have been happy if he had brought her the news half a month ago. After learning the truth, she merely felt sick at his touch. "Let go of me, Ethan, I want a divorce right now." He lifted her without much difficulty. She was averse to his embrace, which was once her safe haven. "Let me go, Ethan Miller, are you crazy?" Putting aside the gender difference in strength, she was too weak from chemo to fight against him. Olivia struggled while he placed her in the backseat of the car, and by the end of it, she looked like she just had an intense workout. Panting, she confronted him. "Ethan, what exactly do you want?" "What do I want?" Ethan loosened his tie, a mocking look in his eyes. "Well, I want you to live in hell. Did you think I was stupid enough to set you free just for you to date another man? I underestimated you. You swore you'd never sign the divorce papers, but in no time, you started dating another man. Are you this thirsty?" Already grappling with a headache, Olivia felt a heartache upon hearing the insult. Biting her lips, she fired back, "Didn't you want a divorce too? Why are you acting up when I want to make it happen? You were the one who had an affair first. Why would you care if I want to date someone else?" Soon, she felt him lifting her chin, telling her with indifference, "Everyone in the world deserves happiness, just not you. Got it?" She looked into his wintry eyes that glimmered with threat. Then, she heard him muttering the brutal words, "I have the final say in our divorce." When Ethan bent over her, the loose tie around his shoulders hung by both sides of her cheeks. Olivia noticed that his exquisite wool coat was perfectly smooth. He went about with his arrogant demeanor as though the people around him were nobodies. Very soon, she would bear witness to his arrogance. When their car weaved its way out of the barriers, she spotted a long queue of cars on the opposite side of the road. At the head of the traffic jam was a Porsche Cayenne that had crashed into the divider. Wasn't that Keith's car? Olivia paled when she learned that Keith had gotten into a crash right after dropping her off. She screamed desperately, "Stop!" Calvin was smart enough not to stop the car for her. Instead, he ignored her screaming and drove on. When she attempted to force the door open, Ethan yanked her by the wrist, and she fell into his arms. He mumbled lazily, "Why? Do you feel bad for him? Are you crazy? Keith is only paying close attention to Dad at the hospital because we're alumni. There's nothing between us. Why did you do that to him?" He slowly brushed his fingertips against her cheek and said, "Oh, that's because. The more upset you are, the happier it makes me." Olivia clutched weakly onto Ethan's shirt despite her rage. She tried to keep her focus and explained, "Ethan, my dad sponsored Jody Leia's studies. Even if they had a relationship, I don't believe that Dad would hurt her." Ethan's expression fell at the mention of Leia. The smirk on his face instantly turned into anger as he carelessly pushed her away. You have no right to speak her name. Olivia felt her back ramming into the hard car door. Already feeble, she now felt like she was about to fall apart. She slumped in the corner, enduring the stabbing pain in her body. There were no more fight left in her to argue with him, so she closed her eyes and calmed herself down to reduce the pain. Curling up in her seat, she felt thankful for putting on some blush and lipstick before leaving home to hide her sickly complexion. Meanwhile, Ethan merely took Olivia's silence as anger. He finally left her alone, but he struggled to calm down. When they arrived at the Miller residence, she was too frail to move. Once Ethan was gone, Kelvin opened the car door and whispered, "Mrs. Miller, are you feeling unwell?" Before she could deny it, Ethan haughtily mocked her, "It's an old trick. Did you think I'd feel bad for you if you acted like you were sick?" In the past year, Olivia had indeed attempted to gain his sympathy by acting weak. As a result, she had become the boy who cried wolf. Ethan did not have the patience to wait for her and threatened, "You'd better get out now, or I'll take it out on the Rogers family." Olivia had just texted Keith but received no response, leaving her in the dark about the extent of his injury. She gritted her teeth and got out of the car. When she stepped on the ground, she was instantly attacked by the biting cold. She felt her legs giving away, and she tumbled over. Thankfully, Olivia did not fall over because Kelvin pulled her at the last minute. She noticed Ethan standing not far away, apathetic. He was unconcerned about her condition. But again, he might have mistaken her action as an attempt to gain his pity. Given his hatred toward her, she wouldn't expect him to care. It was Kelvin who inquired with concern, "Mrs. Miller, are you okay?" "I'm fine. It's probably low blood sugar." Olivia hurriedly made up an excuse before following behind Ethan. The garden was covered in white after a night of snowing. The housekeepers were nowhere to be found, so no one was there to clear the snow. The short walk from the car to the house made her pant. Fighting against the wind and snow, Olivia craved the warmth indoors. Ethan stood by the door with a smirk on his face. "I have to give it to you. Your acting has improved." Back then, in order to keep him by her side, Olivia had used up all ideas, including crying and throwing threats, which she never thought she'd resort to. She felt the irony in Ethan's remark, but instead of explaining herself, she chuckled. "Thanks." She coldly walked around him to get indoors and immediately felt better, thanks to the warmth. Taking off the thick padded jacket, she poured herself a glass of water and leaned softly into the couch. "So, are you getting a divorce or not?" "I'll tell you when I'm getting a divorce. You will live here for now." She sat there with a calm look on her face while toying with the hanging pom-poms on her beanie. "Ethan, you asked for a divorce on the 7th day after my preterm birth. Your urgency puzzled me for a while, but I finally got it after I came across that kid who looked like you. You wanted to leave me as soon as possible to start a family with Marina." With a quiver in her voice, Olivia went on, "For 1 year, I stubbornly put aside your coldness and your betrayal by reminding myself of how good you had treated me in the past. I thought keeping a woman was just a phase you were going through and that I would always be your wife. I even thought that you had an affair because I wasn't good enough. So, I was ready to change for you, and I was willing to overlook your mistakes. Come to think of it now, I was an utter idiot. When you were enjoying family time with another woman and your kids, I was hopelessly waiting for you in a lonely home. It took me a year to accept the reality and my foolishness. That's why I'm letting you go. Seek your happiness or start your new family, it's none of my business." Olivia stood up and stumbled her way toward him, tears sliding down her cheeks. She stopped in front of him and examined the calmness he exhibited. Seated upright and expressionless, he had an imposing air about him, as though he was a strict homeroom teacher who'd fly into a rage at any time. In the past, he only reserved his coldness toward outsiders and treated her with tenderness. Before she knew it, she had become an outsider to him. There was no reason to cling to him anymore. With her head hanging low, Olivia spoke with a rare despair, "We should let go of each other." How does that sound? He felt a little sorry upon hearing the plea, and he noted the exhaustion in her expression, just like a solid dam that had given way after many years of enduring the raging waters. It crumbled into pieces, falling apart and vanishing into the floods. Giving up was way easier than staying one's ground. No one knew how long she had withstood the challenges before she gave up on her faith. Olivia was right, though. Ethan wanted a divorce as revenge and also to legalize the status of his out-of-wedlock children. Ethan was surprised to find that he wasn't as happy as he expected when Olivia gave up on him after a year. "Giving up on you. Dream on. You will be staying here from today. Remember, you're mine forever." Olivia's tears dripped onto Ethan's face, which made him affected by her sadness. Frustrated, he took out his phone and showed her the photo of Keith in an ambulance. "If you stay in touch with him, his family will meet the same fate soon. Olivia, you'd better forget about living a free life. You jerk. You should have come at me. Why did you hurt Keith?" Olivia wanted to slap him, but he grabbed her wrist. With a nasty look in his eyes, he growled, "You sure care a lot for him. Don't forget that you're still Mrs. Miller as long as we aren't divorced." Before Olivia could say a thing, she was scooped into Ethan's arms. He was blinded by anger as he threw her onto the bed. Thankfully, she landed on the soft, custom-designed bed she had ordered and did not get hurt. Still, she could see stars after being rough-handled. Feeling sick, she slumped onto the bed and stared at him with fear. He loosened his tie impatiently, seemingly possessed by demons. Then, he came to her with a cruel smile. "Liv, you were with him for a few days, weren't you? Did he get intimate with you?" He sounded more perverted when he mentioned her nickname, which he hadn't been using for a while. Goosebumps appeared over her skin. Ethan was like a shackled beast, ready to break free and lurch at her at any time. She shook her head and explained, "We're just friends. Our relationship isn't as filthy as you implied." "Filthy? Ha!" Ethan snickered and dragged Olivia by the feet. She fought against the sickness in her body and struggled to break free, but they were like David and Goliath. Little did she know that Ethan hadn't slept well for a few days because he had been searching high and low for her. Driven by hatred, he desperately needed to release his pent-up emotions. He took off her shoes and socks. After a year without sex between them, he felt an uncontrollable desire rising in him, which was reflected in his eyes. Olivia knew that look too well and begged him with a shaky tone, "No, Ethan. You can't." Ethan could easily crush Olivia's dainty ankle in his grasp. He bent over her and slowly inched closer. Her terrified face and her aversion only fueled his desires. Her heart pumping wildly, she roared at him fearfully and furiously, "Keep your filthy paws off me. I don't want you touching me after you've slept with another woman." However, he quickly shut her up with a kiss. Her eyes widened, and she shook her head relentlessly to free herself. His hand traveled under her neck to hold the back of her head, forcing her to look up at him and receive the punishing kiss. His crisp breath was sickening to her, especially when she remembered that he might have kissed Marina before this. Olivia mustered all her energy to shove him away and started heaving by the bed. When she was done, she noticed Ethan glaring at her with a grudgeful look. She said unflinchingly, "I told you not to touch me. You're filthy." Ethan was simmering in anger. Olivia's puking was an instant turn-off, and, by keeping her diagnosis a secret, Olivia was making a bet with herself. If Ethan still loved her, she'd turn her death into her revenge against him. Even when she was dying, she wanted to make sure that he carried the guilt with him forever. However, if Ethan did not love her anymore, it would be pointless to inform him about her diagnosis. Not only would she humiliate herself, but it'd also give Marina a good laugh. With that in mind, Olivia left the bathroom and went downstairs. Madame Burgess had laid out a feast with many of her favorite types of food. Olivia invited Madame Burgess to dine with her. The lady wiped her hands on her apron and served Olivia some soup. "Here's some fruit soup that Mr. Miller specifically asked me to make for you. I told you that he still cares about you, didn't I?" The dishes were a little on the heavier and spicier side than what Olivia preferred. She erred toward the opposite of Ethan's palate, who preferred bland dishes. In the past, they always had different dishes for their meals to accommodate their different taste buds. Now that she was ill, she could no longer take heavy foods. "Mrs. Miller, why aren't you eating? I'm sure that my cooking is as good as before. When Mr. Miller has his meals at home, he'd ask me to make food with a little more spice." Olivia shot her a surprised glance because she knew that Ethan couldn't handle spicy food. Madame Burgess must have read Olivia's mind since she explained, "That's why I said he still cares about you. Even when he's not living with you, he wants me to make your favorite food. Back then, you had to force-feed him spicy food, but now, he eats them on his own. It was tough for him at first, I have to admit. He always choked on the spice and had to chug a whole gallon of water. But his spice tolerance has gone up lately. Oh, the irony of it all. Ethan ended up trying spicy foods, which she had to give up because of her illness. Perhaps, that was why they would never make a good pair." She dropped the topic and pestered Madame Burgess until the latter lent her a phone. Thankfully, she memorized Keith's number. She quickly keyed in the number. A wave of relief washed over her when she heard his voice. It would be her fault if something bad happened to him. When Keith was greeted with silence, he cautiously prodded, "Olivia." The car crash came out of nowhere, and he had pretty much pieced together the reason behind it. "It's me, Keith. I'm sorry I got you into trouble." A hint of excitement crawled into Keith's tired voice. "Were you being hard on me when we were at City Hall because you didn't want to get me into trouble?" She struggled to understand what he was getting at. "Keith, I couldn't call you because my phone was confiscated. How's your injury?" "Don't worry, I wasn't hurt thanks to the airbag." "Is he keeping you hostage? Do you want me to make a police report?" "He and I are legally married. There's no way to report him for taking me hostage." "Keith, I really appreciate what you've done for me, but you don't need to worry about me anymore." Today's crash was a warning from him. "I know you're just being nice to me, but I'm not worth that sacrifice. I feel more relieved now that I know you're safe. Well, goodbye for now." Olivia quickly hung up, leaving Keith grinning foolishly on the other end. He was glad to know that she had directed the harsh remarks at him out of concern for his safety, not because she still loved Ethan. After returning the phone to Madame Burgess, Olivia retired to the bedroom to rest. After falling asleep, she was woken up by the sound of the door closing. She picked up the pungent smell of alcohol that made her sick in her stomach. Before she could say a word, Ethan had thrown his jacket on the floor. She felt a weight on the bed, followed by his slurred whisper. "Darling, I'm home." Above is the entire content of Chapter 1. Thank you everyone for listening.